Okay, we're there. You'll have to go edit it, Michaela.
Okay. What?
Because that will be, you need to edit it, Michaela.
Okay.
So we just need to be sure, Michaela, that all the adults know that you're having that allergy on the senior
Right.
trip. We'll need to let all the adults know, and probably where your EpiPen is. Where do you keep it?
I usually keep it
Oh,
on
now that
me.
you're going to be on live.
Yeah. But yeah, and I was thinking of, because I think there's a few other people who also have nut allergies. And I was thinking maybe we could have a meeting on kind of planning all of that out as far as like food and other things for everybody who has allergies.
Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
How's it going?
You're like looking at Cassie, or Cassie's like looking at you. Do you get that?
Yeah, occasionally. Yes, my photos from younger years, definitely. You can definitely see. I have a few more wrinkles and gray hair than she has now.
That's how it's supposed to be.
So how's it going?
It's good. We're going to live stream this on YouTube so that we have a recording.
Okay. All righty. Do you know how many folks you're expecting?
I think about 7 or 8.
Okay. Cassie asked if she could sit in. I was like, I don't know. That might make me like trip over myself if somebody was sitting in here.
Michaela, she could.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think Cassie would have been fine. I'm like, I don't know, like where she would have sat. I don't know. It was, but she needs to take care of her chicken. She slept in this morning, so she's off to do chicken duty.
Hi.
Good morning, Miss Hall. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm in the middle of at the edge of the Ocala National Forest in Florida.
Wow.
So I'm connected by hotspot, and we'll see how this works.
That's all right. Keep your camera off and it'll help, I think.
Yes, it does.
Hey, Florida, they happen in place, I guess. That's the state to be in.
Well, I tell you what, yesterday was, I know it sounds relative, but it was freezing. It was windy, rainy, cold, and I think in the 50s. And it felt like it was in the 40s. But today is lovely, just lovely. So, yeah.
What are you staying in?
We're staying in our camper, and we're staying at a horse ranch.
Wow.
Oh,
Yes, and they have, stables and corrals, and you can bring your horse. And so it's a very nice crowd of people that are mostly trail riders. And I didn't bring Beauty because I didn't need to, but I wanted to check it out to see if we ever decide we're going to stay longer, because there's people here that stay the whole winter and they bring their horses.
are you still riding Beauty? I thought you couldn't ride her.
I can't ride her, but I have to get somebody to take care of her. If she, so I think board here for a month is 300, which is not terribly expensive compared to many places. And she would be like 20 feet from our camper, so
Oh,
at some point maybe.
she would love it, I bet.
Yeah, yeah. And the dogs are very happy because they have each other, but we're a little crowded. We are definitely a little bit crowded in the camper with a big dog and another dog, but it's fun. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Lorraine.
Thank you.
Thanksgiving in Florida sounds nice. We did that with my oldest daughter when she was a baby. I was desperate for some, I don't know, sunshine and and
Yes.
ocean. And so it's like,
Yes.
we're going, pack our head and let's just go this very last minute. But it's nice. Sometimes you just need the sunshine.
Well, Mount Dora has just a fabulous tree lighting ceremony over this next weekend. And I mean, the entire city is lit up like New York City. And so we're looking forward to being here for that. Just the, welcoming in the Christmas season.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah. But most of all, we're just glad to be with our grandson and daughter.
For sure. That's great. How old is your grandson?
24. Mm-hmm.
Nice. It's nice to be with family.
It is.
We're going to give them just a few more minutes before we begin.
Yeah, no problem.
Good morning.
Good morning, Annette. I think because I know Jacqueline, is Anna going to join us? I can't remember if she said she was, but I know
think she-
Karina is going to join.
I think she says she has tutoring.
Okay, okay. Oh, and Julia. Julia was going to. And Rebecca. Let me just send a note.
Well, I messaged Cassie and told her if she wants to join after feeding the chickens.
She can.
She can, although this totally
Aw, how would
restricts
you
the
like?
tales that I can tell because, our children make wonderful examples of things. And so I don't know, I'll have to warn her. I might talk about you. Maybe I won't. Maybe I just won't.
Make her fictitious.
Right. And I have two other children I can I can use as examples and lots of students over the years. So anyone else traveling for the holidays?
I traveled last weekend to Oklahoma, so now I'm here to stay. Are y'all staying home?
Yeah, with my mom's situation, she over the course of this year has gotten where she's just not mobile at all. I can't get her in the car. So home health, the nurses and stuff have to come here to check on her and things. I can't get her in the car. I can't take her anywhere. So we're home all the time. We're home, but it's good. We're thankful to be able to take care of her. And where we live, thankfully, we're in the kind of Richmond metropolitan area here in Virginia. We're kind of at that place where everything from the city has now come out and is trying to grow up all around us. But we have 14 acres. So if you just look out the windows or you're sitting on the porch, you don't feel like you're in, the suburbs. You feel like you're still in the country. So it's nice.
Oh, yes.
Then you have an older daughter in Florida?
No, Chloe's out in California. She's at La Sierra. Well, she's home right now, but
Oh, okay. I was going to say, is she coming home for the holiday?
we brought her home. She has to go back for 2 weeks. It was kind of rough. Plane tickets were a little pricey this time. We've been able to fly her pretty cheap as we've needed to, but they have the whole week off. She got out of classes Friday morning and then they have off until the Monday after Thanksgiving. And the whole campus is shut down, the cafeteria and everything. She doesn't have a car out there. So it's kind of like the dorms are shut down. So we're like, okay. So, and we wanted her home, of course, but it was like, well, you're coming home one way or another.
And then back again in 2 weeks.
Yes. And then she has to go back for 2 weeks, finish up, do final exams, and then she'll be home for at least a little bit of a stretch at the Christmas. So. All right, well, I see some more folks
Okay.
popping in.
We're going to go ahead and start. So, and Lori, I don't even know your degree or anything. I know you're inspiring to talk to every time I've talked with you. And we're so happy that you're doing this for us. So I'm gonna highlight you. So
Can I undo that on my screen? Yes, I can actually. I'm going to go back to gallery on my screen. I don't want to look at myself that closely.
I get it.
All right. Well, I will introduce myself and then we'll get started. I would like a chance, of course, for everybody to get a chance to introduce themselves as well. Just it'll be helpful for me knowing everybody's background a little bit too. So my name is Lori Couch, and my connection with Sycamore is I have 2 children there. Some of you know them. My daughter Cassie is a senior this year, and my son Nathan is in 8th grade. This is our 2nd year with Sycamore, and we were certainly blessed to find the Sycamore family initially as a response, I guess, if you will, to the pandemic and our situation. But we stayed, we stayed this year, even though they had options, I guess, to go elsewhere. I'm enjoying having the wagons circled. I'm enjoying having my kiddos at home. I've been able to work from home, and I think it's been good for us. So we don't know what the future holds. Nathan's not sure yet what he wants to do for high school, but we're glad to be part of the Sycamore family. My background, I grew up in Southern California in Loma Linda. And then in my middle school years, we moved to South Lancaster. And I forgot to tell you, I was born in the Collegedale area. So, and really, if I start at that beginning, I can tell you I've hit all these huge Adventist, meccas, if you will, like these huge centers. I was born in Collegedale. We lived in Walla Walla for a while. Grew up mostly in Southern California in Loma Linda, lived in South Lancaster, and then moved to Virginia, where I've been ever since high school. I was largely in Adventist education, but then decided to go to a public university. I'm offering me a full scholarship for all of my undergraduate work, and even paid for my books a couple of years. It was pretty cool. And it was actually a really good experience. There's nothing like being amongst people who are either non-believers or different believers, right? To really make you know what you know and what you believe. And so it's actually a really good experience. And the teacher prep program at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I went, was excellent. So I came away from there with an undergraduate degree in English and a master's degree in education. And I have taught in the public school system. From the time that I first came out, I taught until I decided to stay home and take care of my kiddos, when decided to welcome them to the family. And I love to learn, though. This is my bigger thing. I love to learn. So even while I was home, I was still taking classes, pursuing higher learning. And one thing that I pursued was getting a postgraduate certification in literacy. So I'm a certified literacy specialist and coach, which means that I work with other teachers, coaching them in implementing literacy best practices into their classrooms. And so over the course of the years, when I went back into full-time teaching, I have worked again as a classroom teacher. I've also worked as a literacy coach, kind of on various ends of the spectrum. I coached some teachers who are implementing our Virginia preschool initiative here. I coached some of them, and I've also coached high school teachers who are teaching English and also teaching literacy within their content areas. So kind of everything in between. My most recent full-time position was last school year, where I was working as a reading specialist, working with struggling readers. I was the K-12 reading specialist for a virtual school. And so I supported kids and teachers there. I also have worked since 2013 as an instructor for Virginia Commonwealth University, working in their Department of Teaching and Learning within the School of Education. So you can kind of see like maybe where my interest lies, right? I never wanted to leave school. I'm one of those. And maybe you're that teacher too, right? You loved school and you never wanted to leave. So I always am connected in some way. I am teaching for VCU this year. But I'm not teaching full-time in the classroom as you guys are, because I'm taking care of my elderly mom who's living with us. So that was a lot to tell you, but it helps you hopefully know I'm not just somebody with some pie in the sky ideas. Like, I'm boots on the ground like you. I'm in the classroom and I have varied experiences, again, working with students of all ages and working with teachers at different stages. Mostly pre-service teachers, but I do also work with our student teachers through VCU, our interns, and some graduate students who are pursuing literacy degrees and certifications. So this is my background. My passion is for literacy, my passion for writing and communication skills in general, the language arts. I think if I really had to distill down where that comes from, it truly connects to my faith and my belief that as a teacher, whatever I do, I should do it with all my might. So I'm constantly seeking the best ways to support my students, whether those are K-12 students or whether those are teachers who I'm working with, but also the belief that God wants us to be effective communicators. We are here as his imagers, right? Like his image in the world. And so I think that when we can effectively communicate any of our ideas, but particularly those that relate to our faith, I just think that that is a powerful tool. So I won't go too far down that road because our time is limited. But on that note, would it be all right with you all if we start with a word of prayer? Is that fine? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, here we go. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the gift of this day, and thank you for the opportunity for us to get together and talk about the ways that we can support the young people with whom we work. And Lord, I just thank you for each of the teachers here. This is a hard time in history, I think, to be a teacher. And Lord, you know the daily challenges that we face without all of the things maybe going on publicly in our nation when it comes to teaching. And so, Lord, I thank you for the dedication of each individual here and that they are here with us this morning. And Lord, I hope that this is an opportunity, and I pray that this is an opportunity for us to, each of us, grow as teachers and in this amazing work and this very critical work that we do with young people. And we invite your presence to be here with us and open our minds and help us to engage and reflect and make connections and to be able to grow. All things to your glory, Lord. In your precious Son, Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So I don't know everyone, so I'm going to go ahead and screen share if that's fine. I want to share my agenda, the agenda that I've got planned, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to stick pretty close to it. you realize as you start thinking about, when I started thinking about, what I might talk to you about, typically when I teach a class, right, it's a semester length class. And I was like, wow, how am I condensing this into 2 hours? What am I going to do here? And so what I've tried to do, because I can't condense it all into 2 hours, that's just the reality. What I've tried to do is hopefully start with some things where we can build some maybe common language and common knowledge and common understandings, and then kind of add to that and get into some more details about what we know about effective writing instruction. I would love to do activities and strategies. I don't know that this is going to be the place where there's going to be a lot of time for that. But maybe we can meet again, or I can definitely share some resources for that. All right. And I've titled my presentation, Teaching Writers. This was one of those things when I went back to do my postgraduate work and my research focus, while I was broadly working in all things literacy, my research focus was on writing instruction particularly. And I think because as a coming out of, my own educational experiences, my teachers' approaches to writing instruction were write this, and then I'm going to put some red ink on it, and hopefully you'll learn from it. And I did learn from that because I wanted to learn from that. But I know that many of my fellow students didn't learn because they saw the red ink and they just kind of shut down. There was no other instruction involved. And so I did learn to write well. And being an English major, I was writing papers in my sleep. I mean, I had papers due every day, it felt like. And so I was a solid writer, but when I was in my classroom with my students, the teaching of writing was it was almost something I couldn't quite get a hold of, the best way to do that. And so when I went back to do my my postgraduate work, again, I was this is what I want to know. I want to know, do we know how to effectively teach writing? And if so, why haven't I learned this? I felt like my teacher prep program, my master's program had prepped me for everything else except for teaching writing. So one of the shifts in my own mindset when I was studying all these things and learning about what makes for best practices was this idea that I needed to shift my focus from teaching writing to teaching writers, because our needs as writers are sometimes vary, not sometimes, they vary. But the other thing is when I take my emphasis off of specific items in curricula, right, and focus it on to the students, it just kind of, it helped me change my perspective on how I was teaching writing in a good way. So I have titled this Teaching Writers, and this is my plan. And we'll go with what we need to go with. We'll see how it goes. But my plan, I definitely want some time to learn about you, who you are, where you're from, and what your teaching experience is, what you're teaching right now. And then I'm going to talk about a vision for our students as writers. We're going to briefly touch on some affective domain considerations, I think, that are important anytime we're talking about any kind of instruction with students, but particularly with writing. A little bit about how we teach and what a workshop model might look like, what we teach, and then talking about getting started. And I know you already started if you're teaching writing, I got it, but that's not what I mean. More getting started, just some maybe basic understandings that will be important then as we establish common language and understanding. And then I would love to talk to you about an inquiry model for genre studies, because I understand that most of us here, I think, are middle and high school teachers. And so typically what we're teaching are how to write well in different genres, right? And so we'll spend a little bit of time there. But to start, I would love if we could just go around. I know some of you know each other well, but I don't know all of you. So if you could just tell me your name so that I know that I'm saying it correctly, what you teach, and maybe something that others may find interesting or surprising about you. And teachers have to model stuff, right? So I'm going to tell you something interesting and surprising about me because I've told you all the stuff that goes on my CV. So now I can tell you something interesting about me is I like to hang out in graveyards. And not because I'm not a person who's into morbid things. It's not that. It's like I'm a storyteller and I love stories. If you go in old graveyards, there are stories there or stories that you might imagine. And so that is actually one of my favorite places to visit when I get to go around. I love history and I love graveyards. So, all right, maybe we should just go with like the next on my screen. Like if you have the little tiles up next on my screen, Miss Lori, you're next on my screen.
I need to unmute. My name is Lori, and this year I'm not teaching. Typically, I teach algebra, and this year I'm just I'm the director, and so I'm trying to keep up with all of that. And something that others may, I think everybody knows me pretty well. I'm an Oklahoma girl, and that's where my heart is in Oklahoma. But I'm in Texas. Not sure. That I have anything more interesting than that. I'll think about it. You can go to the next one.
All right, who's next on your screen?
Jacqueline.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jacqueline and I am a Texan native. I've been here since I was born, all my life and everything. I am a school certified teacher. Let's see, I've had the privilege of teaching public school, everything between kindergarten and high school, except for middle school in public school. I've never taught middle school. This is my first year at Sycamore. And I think I brought that same experience into Sycamore. I have kindergarten ELAR, and then I have high school Spanish, and then some of the Bible classes and SDA history. And I think something interesting about me is that I never went to school to become a teacher. I have a degree in undergrad in psychology and a master's in marriage and family counseling. But because of where I live, being such a remote place, I started job opportunities were in the school system. And so, as I was listening to you present yourself, I learned how to teach through the example of other teachers, since I never took, pedagogy or educational classes or anything like that. Great teachers in my own experience, I had amazing elementary and middle school teachers that I remember. And then when I started working in the public school, I was to work with some really amazing teachers as well. And so in regards to writing, I'm not teaching any English or literacy classes in the upper levels right now. But I remember when I started teaching in high school, I was teaching electives at the high school level. And then I got switched down to kindergarten level from one year to the next. And I was faced with the challenge of teaching reading literacy and writing, and I had no idea. And I'm thinking, from my college experience, how do you get kindergartners to write a thesis? And I was just it was over my head. I had no idea how to do it. But thanks to great writing instructors and literacy coaches, they were able to get me through those years in kindergarten, which became some of my best years in my teaching experience. And so even though I'm not teaching anything that may require writing right now, I'm excited to be here at this workshop to see what it is that I can learn and what tools I can gain and apply them later on wherever my teaching career leads me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jacqueline. And I think your background is it's so rich. We're going to touch on some psychology in a little bit. I might need you.
And Rebecca is next.
Okay, excuse my voice. It's vacation, so it's time to get sick, I guess. My name is Becky Reese. I've taught for several years and been blessed to have lots of good experiences in the classroom. This year is my first year at Sycamore, and I'm enjoying teaching language arts to 6th, 7th, 8th grade and English to sophomores, 10th grade. And I guess something you might find interesting about me is I have 4 boys. 2 of them are twins, and their birthday is Christmas Day. So we're looking forward to that in a few weeks. That's it.
That is exciting.
Lorraine, are you still here? Annette?
I am. I'm here.
You are. Okay.
Okay. I'm Lorraine Hall, and I have been working for Sycamore, I think, almost 6 years, 5 for sure. And I have loved every minute of it. Before that, I taught in Seventh-day Adventist church schools. I started out in a one-teacher school in South Dakota. And eventually I incorporated and started a school in my home and had students from the surrounding area of Wyoming and South Dakota, and tried to incorporate lots of hands-on experiences. For science, we often went up into the national forest, the Black Hills National Forest, and it was just an amazing time. We helped the ranchers next door raise bum lambs. The students did. We had chickens. We really just had a wonderful time. So I have a master's in administration and spent 10 years as a principal while teaching kindergarten. And so I feel like my master's degree at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, was probably the highlight of my education, because we had to learn how to spot best practices and teaching techniques. I think it helped me more as a classroom teacher than anything else that I had experienced, and I just appreciated it so much. Right now, I'm teaching social studies and geography to 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. The 10th and 11th graders are from China for Sycamore, and the rest are the US day students, and I absolutely love it. But I want to learn more about teaching writers, so I'm here today and very grateful for it. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Annette? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Annette.
Hi, good morning. I'm Annette, and I am a native of Michigan, a double alumnus of Andrews. I have my undergraduate in English, and my master's degree is actually in reading education, and I'm certified in diagnostics and remediation K through 12 through the state of Michigan. I'm retired now, but I'm really not retired. I'm doing some other things right now, but I've taught for 40 plus years, grades 3 through 12, and I've also taught I actually instituted the writing program through Moberly Area Community College for Sunnydale Academy. So I've taught at Southern, freshman comp for Southern Adventist University when I was teaching at AAA in Georgia. I've taught freshman comp at Scottsdale Community College in Arizona, Chemeketa Community College in Oregon. I've kind of lived all over the United States, and I've lived in Puerto Rico as well. I helped design the English program when Bella Vista in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico went from a junior academy to a full academy. So I helped do that. I've also had a little bit of experience on some interesting committees. I was one of the original writers for the secondary standards for language arts for the North American division, and that was kind of fun to work with that. I'm retired right now. What some people might find surprising with me, I have recently been ordained as an elder in my local church. So I have a little different dimension that I'm into right now. I am preaching. I have a preaching schedule, and one of our sister churches, I am preaching once a month, and it's been really good to take my experiences, but now they're flowing into a little different dimension. I'm also having a little more time For writing, I'm currently working on my autobiography. And also it's a story of a girl growing up in Detroit back in the 50s and 60s. Very different from what you would find Detroit, Michigan today. I lived in a completely different world when I grew up there. So the book centers around that. And I'm also currently working on a short devotional. So I've been at Sycamore, I think this is my 3rd year now. I love teaching at Sycamore. The kids are great. The colleagues are great. It's just really, I think, enriched me as a person. And it has always also stretched me as a person, because online teaching is quite different from classroom teaching. So I'm learning a lot. I'm really interested to know how to implement some of these writing strategies through the computer. In the classroom, it's one thing, but when you're on a computer, it's different. So I'm kind of looking forward to how to navigate that a little bit better. So I'm happy to be here this morning, and it's nice to meet you.
Thank
Nice
you,
to
Annette.
meet you. I feel like I should have consulted with you maybe before I
Oh, no,
before I
no.
present myself as the professional here. You have
Oh,
got
no,
some
no,
serious
no,
experience.
not at
all
all. I'm learning. God gives us all diverse skills and talents, and we bring
Absolutely.
richness into the body of Christ. And that is what
Absolutely.
really helps us, each one of us, to grow. We're here for each other. And the word is press together. And I think that's what we're doing today. And we're pressing together, like you said in your prayer, for the glory of God, but also in a way that's really going to help our student body.
For sure. No, I'm excited to have such varied backgrounds here. This is going to be good. I think we're going to have some good conversation.
Karina, you're next. Karina.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Karina. This is my first year at Sycamore, but this is my kid's 2nd year. I live in Mexico City, so it was like a perfect option for us to be at Sycamore. I have a bachelor's and master's, a bachelor's in business administration and my MBA. I do not have any teaching experience, so this is like something I really wanted to do because I want to be able to be more diverse. Pretty good at math, but English is not my forte, but I could definitely use the help and gain some more experience so I can help out more. I just pretty much co-teach and tutor right now. So it's going pretty well so far. I like it.
It's nice to meet you.
Tammy?
Hi, yeah, Tammy Lewis. I have been, before I had kids, I taught a few years in small Adventist schools, a few years in larger schools where I just did 1 grade. I homeschooled, taught some public school. Mainly right now at Sycamore, I'm teaching middle school math. I have 4 kids, my younger 2 are identical twin girls. Something interesting. My husband's a big golfer. I have started playing golf with him recently. So that's me.
Nice.
Judith.
Good morning. I used to think that graduate school, especially a master's in divinity, will be more focusing on preaching. I was wrong. I had just taken the Michigan test because I have done my bachelor's degree at Adventist University Antilles in Mayagüez, close to Bella Vista, actually. And I passed that exam by just 1 point. I don't know what happened. Then I was thrown with all these people that knew how to write in English better than I did. Actually, I didn't even know how to write in Spanish. I knew how to preach, but to write, I didn't know. So I wanted to do a PhD in theology, so I needed to have a good GPA. And I remember that I was obsessed with writing, trying to compensate for what I did not have. The good thing is that I have been reading since I was 5, or perhaps even earlier. Las bellas historias de la Biblia, how do you say that in English? The beautiful stories of the Bible. I don't know if you remember Maxwell. It's the one who wrote them. I read that like 7 times. So I had this reading background that helped me to survive. I was taking an independent course with George Knight, I remember, and before giving him the last paper, I had like 10 people read it. And that was a problem because everybody just came up with a different idea of what should I do. Having that weakness made me read lots of books about writing. Not enough about teaching though, but about writing. Still in doing the PhD in history, I knew that I had that weakness. Everybody could write in what they will write in an hour. I need to take 4 or 5 hours to write. And I still do, it still takes a lot of time. The thing is that since I began to teach at the university level, since 2000, everything was about writing. I used to teach most of the time, I don't know why, this course, second year course, historical research. So half of it was about research and the other half was about writing. People think that historians are the people who like to tell stories. Storytellers are those. Historians are usually writers. And you don't do anything in history without writing. You need to publish constantly. So just teaching writing because I had to, not from a English perspective, but mostly from a history perspective, landed me here, I think. So I want to learn how to teach what I have learned myself, and looking forward for Lori. Thank you.
Thank you. The other person we have here is Michaela, who is a senior. And she has helped me teach algebra. So your name is Michaela, and you have helped teach algebra. And she does like to write, and she's the editor of our school newsletter. So.
I know. Michaela, tell us something that we don't know that's interesting or surprising about you.
Let's see. I was born and raised in Colorado. Actually live in the same house that I've lived in my whole life. And I like CrossFit. I guess those are the only 2 interesting things.
And I didn't know that.
Very good. And I appreciate the newsletter team at Sycamore. And I love that the students are the ones who put that together and work on that. I think Sycamore is a very great environment to grow as a writer with those kinds of opportunities. So I'm glad you're with us, Michaela. Okay, thank you everyone for sharing more about your background with me. I think that helps. And I was coming into this with a perspective of we might have some shared knowledge, but that we also bring a lot of other knowledge with us. And so hopefully some of the things that we talk about will help us to kind of lay some common groundwork, if you will, when it comes to teaching writers. But also you're going to enrich that with your background, things that I have no experience with, right? And so I think that that's going to be an amazing opportunity. Anytime that we start talking about teaching writers or teaching writing, it's really important that we keep our vision for our students as writers in mind. And some of us haven't maybe even thought about having a vision for our students as writers, depending upon, your experience. If you have come out of a traditional, classroom teaching experience, especially those of us who have public school background, you've got your standards, right? This is what I teach. But the reality is that we teach people. We teach students, we teach writers. We don't teach pieces of paper, right? Those guidelines are there to hope that we're developing certain attributes and things in our students and help them develop skills. But we really need to have a vision for our students as writers in order for us to proceed with instruction that is going to support our students as writers in all manner of ways. I don't know that we have time to do it like in our session today, but I want to challenge you if you teach writers of any sort, and regardless of your content area, students need to be able to write, right? If you're teaching science, if you're teaching math, they need to be able to articulate their thoughts in writing in some form. Definitely, Ms. Hall teaching social studies and geography, like Professor Hidalgo said, history and these things, it's all about writing, right? And communicating those ideas. So all of us, for whatever reason, whatever we're doing with it, we need to have a strong sense of what it is that we want for our students as writers, like big picture. And I shared mine a little bit when I spoke at the beginning. My ultimate goal for anyone that I work with when it comes to writing is that they are able to communicate well. And I'm just going to leave it with communicate, right? Because we know that we communicate orally, we communicate in writing. But both of those actually support one another, right? The more that I'm exposed to, quality verbal communication, I can translate that into my writing and vice versa. As I learn to write my ideas and get them organized and write well, that also supports my ability to articulate. And I love that Professor Hidalgo touched on reading and how he was doing a lot of reading. Reading supports us, supports our students. And it doesn't have to be reading just about writing. Reading well-written writing supports us as writers. And so I love that he made that connection. So my vision for any student that I work with, again, is that they can communicate well in writing, oral communication as well. And so that's where I start then, okay, so what does that mean for whatever level, whatever experience level of student that I'm working with? And then I use what we call backward design. If you're in an education, if you've come from an education field kind of experience, you've probably heard this, right? We look at what our goal is and we start thinking about, okay, so what do my students need to know to get there? And I start planning backwards. What are those objectives, those stops along the way, right? Those little places for them to get there. And then I can start planning those specific activities, assignments, and assessments that will help them reach that goal. And ultimately, hopefully, my larger vision for them. So if you have not done that, I challenge you to do it. Articulate your vision. What is it that you want for your students, your particular students that you work with? And what does that look like? What do they need to know to get there? And then we start thinking about, okay, so how do I help them? How do I help equip them in doing that? If you have thought about it, does anybody want to share? Do you have a vision? Do you have something with the particular students that you're working with? Is this something you've considered what you want for them?
Now that you mention it, I'm thinking that I should have done that a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a different way of approaching it, right? Especially for teacher people, and a fair number of us in here are teacher people or who have that experience. We're used to saying, okay, well, here's my list of objectives. I'm going to do this activity and this to meet it, but sometimes losing sight of that bigger, where is this all going? And am I going about it the right way to get there, right? And I'll share, sometimes I have had students who can technically, right? They've got the grammar, they've got the usage, they've got the mechanics down pat. They can put together a paper that does not need one editing mark put on it when they're done. But their idea, it's not unique, it's not anything new, right? It's not gonna make you think. In fact, it's one of the, you might get to the end of the paper and I forgot what your point was. Let me go back. Oh yeah, you did make your points. You got a perfect 5-paragraph essay, but you didn't really have anything to say. There was no heart. There was no passion. There was nothing. It was not memorable. It didn't move me, this kind of thing. And it's okay, so, do we just want students who've got the mechanics down pat, or do we want students who are actually communicating ideas? right? And so that's been kind of a challenge for me as a teacher to make sure that I am, I feel like grammar and usage are easy to teach. Like I've got rules for that, right? I can teach you that. Getting somebody to develop voice is a different challenge.
Lori, I think
Yeah.
that one of the goals that I have had, and they develop, over the years, and you learn a lot of new things as you're going. Performance is one thing, but expression is another. And I think because writing is an art, it's like any other art. Two people can play the same piece of music and the audience responds completely differently. It's the same piece of music. What is the difference? They may be performing it by having all of the, T's crossed and I's dotted, but there's no expression of, there's no feeling, there's no expression. We don't, that writing does not draw us to empathy or to any type of action or reaction to it. And I think an important element for me in writing is for students to enjoy it and to not be afraid of it. Because when you say freshman composition, a lot of even parents are this way sometimes. Oh, are they? But when they get to college, they're not going to. Yes, they are going to be able to write, but not if we put them in a box of we just want the performance of doing this, but we're leaving out an important element of their expression. And it's communication, it's expression. It is an extension actually of the person. So that's kind of what I've wanted to put into writing. I'm so happy that I'm doing creative writing this year, because a lot of the same elements that we touch on, that is kind of a catalyst to that creative writing. So for them, I think let's not leave out that we want them to enjoy it and we want it to be an expression or an extension of them because it is an art.
Yes. I am so glad for your thoughts on that. That was a perfect segue. And I want to talk about the affective domain and how that relates to the art of writing. Okay, so when we're talking about the affective domain, and I should call on Jacqueline, we talk about the psychology aspects here, but the affective domain is the things that have to do with your feelings, your emotions, right? And what we know from research and from the amazing ability that we have now to scan people's brains while they're doing stuff like reading and writing and seeing those neurons firing and seeing the different parts of the brain connecting. Things I think that teachers have known in their hearts all along, teachers who study students, who study the kids that they work with, have already known, but now we have the brain science to back it. Our affective and cognitive interactions are central. Like, this is what's going on. There's nothing that you're teaching to a child where the affective domain is like checked out. We cannot separate our cognition from all of those feelings and those other things that are going on. So we know that there are connections there. And this matters so much in any of the teaching that we are doing, but this matters significantly, I think, when it comes to writing. Because when it comes to writing, like Annette was saying, like, we want our students to put something into it, right? We want some heart in there. Like, I'm sure there's more technical words for it, but we want their heart in it. Right? We want to hear their ideas. We want them to care about what they're doing. And so are we creating an environment? We have to, do that self-reflection. Are we creating an environment where they're safe to do that? Is our environment welcoming, to their ideas? Do we want to hear their ideas? Are we encouraging them to be critical thinkers versus just spitting out some flat performance, right? That just meets the criteria and they're doing it just to meet the criteria. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question in that regard. I have noticed that writing is similar to math in many of the students' mindset. It's scary for them, especially when you return their papers all with red ink. It's not going to be red ink here in Sycamore because we are doing it electronically, but you get the idea. They are very concerned with being criticized. I have taken the steps not criticize them when they are in the first phase of writing, the creative phase mostly. When they have written the first draft, a complete draft, then I start to criticize them. But I'm not sure if that is a good technique.
Yeah, and I hope that we're going to have more time to talk about that too, and we will. We're definitely going to talk about that as we talk about the writing process. Like you said, maybe not when they're first doing that draft. And I would just like change our thinking on it a little bit. It's not being critical, right? If we're able to teach our students something that helps draw out their idea and their voice, because that's really, when we start putting writing, we're talking about conventions, the ways that we expect things, right? We're talking about our comma placement. We're talking, maybe if we're doing research, we're talking about, style and the way that things are expected. But all of those things are there for a purpose, not for isolated ability. Like, I don't care if you can, in isolation, properly use the semicolon. What I want to know is, can you do that to create a powerful sentence in the piece that you're working on that has a message that you're trying to share with someone? And that semicolon is going to help you share that message because it's going to put together that sentence in a way that makes sense, right? That's where I think that if we have the mindset like, oh, this is an opportunity to teach this student how to use this convention in order to make their voice stronger, to make their idea come through more clearly. And I think as long as we are also communicating that to our students, right, so that it doesn't feel like criticism, it's like, hey, I'm not saying like you've done this poorly. What I'm saying is I have this amazing little tool called the semicolon that is going to change your world when it comes to combining sentences, right? We can use those things as tools because that's really what they are. And I think that you're right, though, that students who have experienced a lot of like red ink, and I will defend teachers for a moment, sometimes because we don't know any better. Okay, because conventions are easy to correct. That is so easy for me to mark up a paper. And if I don't know better, like if I don't know how else to teach you, right, then that's all I'm going to focus on. So in defense of teachers, sometimes I think it's just, we just don't know. But for us, we're here, right? So let's talk about that, and let's think about opportunities for teaching and showing our students, I can teach you how to do this in a stronger way, right? Here's a tool that you can use. That doesn't, like, their writing should never boil down to just the way that they're able to use conventions. That's really not what writing is about, right? So I think that that's an excellent point for us to keep in mind. And like you said, that doesn't make for safe space. It makes students scared of writing. And I think that you have nailed that. I mean, from elementary school through college, I have met plenty of kids who are scared to write. And so we don't want that to be the experience when they come to work with us, right? We want to show them that there's a different way to go about this. And that's why I felt like this was just an important piece to talk about here, because the classroom environment, whether it is online or whether it is face-to-face, is very critical. And there's only so many things that we can control, right? But those things that we do have control of, we need to do that in the way that we teach, the way that we set up interactions in our classroom, the way that we respond to students writing. Those are things that are within our control. Some things that are very much housed inside of our students, our learners, like motivation. Their motivation to do something. Are they only motivated because it's a grade? I have to do it. My mom said I had to do it, right? Is this their motivation for writing? We want to, if that's happening, we want to address that too, right? To encourage them because they have actually important things to say and contribute to the world, right? And that's why you're here. That's why I want to teach you writing. So we can support their motivation, but that's obviously an internal aspect. Conation, also related. And again, feel free, my psychology background folks, feel free to correct or add or whatever needs doing here. But conation, when we're talking about that, like that's that will, like to persist with something even when it's difficult. That's that internal, I guess that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to keep at this. It's hard, but I've got that will. I'm going to persist. I'm determined to do this. And these are things that our students have to develop on their own, and yet we're there and we can support that when we set up the kind of learning environment that is like, I'm here to support you in growing as a writer, not to criticize you and tell you everything you're doing wrong. Does that make sense? Okay, so and the other thing I want to touch on here is like independent versus dependent learners. Because we're going to talk in a moment about what our students should be writing, how often they should be writing, things like that. And we've already touched on this a bit. We want students who are passionate and writing things with voice and expression, right? And one way that we know from research that we do that is that students pick their own topics to write about. And that requires some instruction. We're going to talk about that. But this goes a long ways toward creating independent learners, which is what we want. And any of you who have classroom experience know, right, that we have dependent learners who are the ones who are always asking that question, well, what should I write about? Or what should I do? They want you to tell them rather than having to make that decision themselves. And that probably grows some out of fear or some out of maybe just never being handed the keys. Like, I don't know what you should write about as the teacher. In reality, I don't know what you should write about. But maybe I can help you figure out what you should write about, right? Things that matter to you. So these are just some kind of big ideas that really could be their own session in themselves. But hopefully, I mean, I've been helped by the conversation here. Hopefully that gets just some thoughts going about the kind of environment that we want to set up for our students when it comes to writing. Things that are supportive, we're there to help them learn, right? Okay. And this ties directly into how we teach writing. And these are things that are, these are ideas that are research-based, and I can share resources with you. I have references at the end, although I realized I needed to clean a couple of things up with my formatting there, but I do have some. My references are at the end, and I can also share other resources if you're interested. There's a growing body of evidence of research when it comes to writing instruction and what works and what doesn't work. For years, the literacy field, it was all focused on reading, and we know a lot about how people learn to read and how to support that. And we have just, again, this growing body of evidence when it comes to teaching writers. And one of the huge ideas that has come out of that is that we know, and this actually shouldn't be a huge idea because we know this from other fields too, that students learn best when experiences are meaningful and authentic. That shouldn't be a shocker, right? We know that from our own personal experiences probably, right? When experiences are meaningful and they are authentic, we learn. Like Annette said, you know, writing is it's an art, right? It's a craft. And so when we consider it in that way, it's like, I might be able to watch a YouTube video or read a book about how to, you know, create pottery. Okay. But if I don't ever put my hands in the clay, and if I don't have some solid instruction there while I'm doing it, it's not going to be the same, right? And if I'm not making something that's meaningful to me, if somebody's telling me what I have to make with the clay versus me getting to choose what I want to craft, it's going to be a different experience. The learning will be different, right? So the same with writing, we want it to be meaningful. We want it to be authentic. And go ahead.
So by that, do you mean that like general journal writing? Because that doesn't seem like it's meaningful and authentic. So is general journal writing not helpful?
General journal writing is actually very helpful because it's very meaningful and authentic. If they're choosing what they're writing about, then they're writing about things that matter to them. And anytime that we engage in the act of writing, so
Lori, you went out for a second. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so you said that, yes, anytime we engage in. So,
yes.
So wait a minute. So if I have questions for journal, like, what would you do with $1 million? Is that meaningful and authentic?
So you're putting me on the spot. I would say no.
Okay. So when you're saying general journal writing, should it be journal for 10 minutes today about any topic you like? Journal 10 minutes today about any topic you like?
I would love for it to be more than 10 minutes, but yes, sometimes we work with whatever parameters we have.
Well, I'm just, So in general, it should just be totally general, our journal.
Just writing.
Just writing. No, we don't give the topic.
Exactly. And just like Annette was saying, like she's working on some writing projects right now, right? She's making those decisions, those writerly decisions about where those go. Right. And I can imagine, I don't know Annette's writing process, but I can imagine some of that started with rehearsing in her head, some ideas that she had, or maybe even journaling out some things that were coming to her. Right. And then she's perhaps turning that into, she's envisioning where that's going to go. But there's a lot of stuff, those of us who do write, we're all writers of some form or another, but those of us who do engage in just writing for our own purposes, just like notebook writing, journal writing, we don't always do anything with that except for it might just stay there, and that's okay. And that's okay with our students too. But every time I put pen or pencil to paper, I'm growing as a writer. I'm learning how to better articulate my ideas, to get them down. It's a way to think through things.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked. We're gonna touch on that some more for sure.
Okay, go ahead.
I had one comment to make. One thing that I have run into with the journal writing, and I've done something, I'm trying something a little different this year with the students, and it seems to be working, is sometimes students are reluctant because they don't understand the difference between journal writing and a diary.
Yes.
And for them, it's the same thing. And I've had students say to me, "Oh, I don't want to do journal writing because I don't want everyone reading my personal thoughts and feelings, and who's going to see this, who's going to read it, and what are they going to do with that information?" So what I have done this year to kind of take away some of that, and every group that you work with is a little different. Some students feel that way, others don't. But what I've done for one class is I have taken the book of Proverbs, and I have just taken out of there randomly, really, Proverbs is how we live, how we deal with others, and how we respond, how we react, what we should be looking for. And the students are really responding to that. What do you think of this? What are the key words in here? How would you respond to this? So I've kind of given them a frame, but now I'm letting them write what they want and what they're comfortable with that. And with another class, I have taken just famous quotes from different people in different disciplines, science and history and philosophy, and just different people, and from different major works. If you were in this person's situation, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? And I think they're more comfortable starting there. I think it's different if the journal writing is for much younger students that are not in that adolescent age where they're kind of, there's awkward feelings and thoughts, and, they're not sure, they're not sure who to trust. So yeah, that's kind of what I have found. And that's what I'm doing this year. So far, it has worked pretty well with them responding to a quote or, something from the Bible. It kind of gets them thinking too. So just an idea.
Yeah, and I would love to see, because I feel like there's a couple of things going on there, right? Like, so we do have that aspect of, I think we need to make very plain how keeping a diary is different than, and I don't call it journals when I use them in the classes that I teach. For that reason, I call them writer's notebooks, and I explain it in a totally different way. Like, this is a place where we play with the art of writing. You're here to learn more about writing. This is where we do that. You're going to play, you're going to grow as a writer. I'm not grading any of the quality of what's in there. I always give them some credit, some points for doing it, right? But I don't grade any of it in that sense. With younger students, I do look through their journals. It's a lot easier when you're in person, but I do, just so that I know, what of my writing lessons are starting to show up, right? Because you'll start to see things show up, things that you've taught will start to show up in their writing. With older students, I just tell them, just you do it, you flip through, you tell me how many, just show me what you've done, and we can easily do that in the virtual world. Just show me that you're working on it. I also pose questions to my class, like, what are you writing about? lately? What's the most unusual thing you've written about lately? And they don't have to share the whole thing, but they can just, it just gets that idea like we're all doing this. It's no big deal. I model with mine. I have various ones sitting around here, but like I don't know where mine is right now. It's buried under books, but I'll just say I heard the most interesting quote on the radio, and I wrote down some thoughts about it. But Annette, I was thinking like how you're talking about using Proverbs and the quotes. So you're giving them like this like little jump off point, right? So what about now that they're comfortable with doing that? What about then saying, okay, now you find your own Bible verse, you find your own quotes or whatever, work from there. Tune your ears, because we really need them to not be waiting on us to hand them, right? We need them to start paying attention to what's going on around them and start developing like, oh, that really speaks to me, and then being able to put into words. Do you see what I mean? And so it's definitely a transition thing, right? It's like, I'm going to go biblical here, but it's like, when you're a new believer, right? It's like milk, right? And then you got to start eating solid food. Well, we can help them, right? We do that with our children, right? We start giving them little bits of food that they're not going to choke on. So here, give them little bits. But the whole goal is that they're ultimately feeding themselves, right? Same here. It's like we want to move from that they're dependent on you to they're independent and learning to gather their own writing ideas. So I actually am glad that you brought that up. And like I said, we're definitely going to hit on that some more. Professor Hidalgo, I thought I saw your hand up earlier.
Well, yeah, I think that you approached the subject already, but I was wanting to mention that I see what you now call the writer's note as very important.
Yes.
Because it is the way in which I engage whatever I'm learning or listening to. I am developing these styles now as we go along, but I ask them not simply to show facts that they want to remember from whatever they are reading, but also questions. They have to put their questions, and as important, ideas, because I have noticed that ideas will come and they will disappear, and some will not come back ever.
Yes.
So if we have that interaction there, they start to write. And for me, that will be kind of like the seeding ground where anything then can come up from writing. Of course, it is not one specific type of essay format, but they are writing ideas there. That's it.
I love that. I'm writing that down, like that seeding ground, right? It is. It's like soil, right? Like they're trying things out, planting different little ideas, and then they, we'll see what springs up, what comes from that. I love that idea. I'm keeping your analogy. I'm going to use it again. So I want to wrap up on this slide, but so from what we've seen from this growing body of evidence, we know that making things meaningful and authentic for our students really across the board in education is the way to go. But when it comes to writing, we know that authentic writing activities are critical to writing development. Okay, so our students are growing as writers. They're not all going to be there. It's a developmental process, just like learning to speak. Learning to write is a developmental process. Authentic writing activities are going to reflect those of writers in contexts outside of school. And this means that at some point as teachers of writers, we have to let go of just like living in this little academia writing world, right? Most of the writing in the world is like totally not in a 5-paragraph essay, right? When's the last time you read a really good article or blog post that you wanted to share with somebody else and you were like, wow, that person, like that was the best 5-paragraph essay ever? Like, no, we have to start to kind of expand our minds, like maybe not just thinking outside of the box, like get rid of the box, like just, and think about how we can encourage our students to do real writerly work. And what this would include then would be establishing purposes for writing, other than because my teacher told me I had to write something. Okay, we want to motivate them to establish their own purposes for writing, to identify the audiences for whom they're going to be doing this writing, engaging in the processes of writing, which are so much more than just writing words down, right? There's thinking, there's researching, getting ideas, there is writing, there's conferring with other writers, whether that's your teacher, your peers, whoever that is, right? Conferring, getting some feedback. It's engaging in revising and editing, rehearsing things in your brain, reading to inform your writing. And then there's acts of publishing and even, drawing and sketching things out. There are so many things that real writers do in the act of writing that informs their writing. And we need to create space and conversation and help our students to kind of understand that those are all part of being a writer. And I love this quote from Mem Fox. It's one of my favorite quotes. She says, "We don't engage in meaningless writing exercises in real life." So Mem Fox is a writer. She's written children's books. She's written for adults. She's written a lot of articles on writing. But she says, we're far too busy doing the real thing. And by doing the real thing, we constantly learn how to do the real thing better. Okay, that act of writing that we're talking about helps us grow as writers. So probably the most effective instructional model for teaching writing is a writing workshop. Depending sometimes on the school's structure, we're not face-to-face, right? We're face-to-face, but we're not in person. Sometimes it varies what this looks like, but there's three main components that I recommend when you're teaching writers. And not just that I recommend, again, this is what we know works, is that you have some time for effective instruction. Okay, whenever you're focused on writing, because I realize if you're teaching in a content area, if you're teaching history, if you're teaching math or whatever you're teaching, you might not have the ability to have writing workshop every time that you meet. But whenever you're focused on writing, there needs to be time for effective instruction, writing instruction that applies to all of your writers. Okay, whether that's around like learning how to develop your own ideas for writing, or something like learning how to use the semicolon to combine sentences, right? You need effective instruction. That's you, right? That's on us as the teachers. A lot of people call them mini lessons. I like to call it a focus lesson because it reminds me it needs to be focused. It needs to be focused on writing. It needs to be very intentional. And it's usually very brief. We're talking like a 5 to 10 minute lesson in which I always say, like, you show and tell. Okay, you show them what you're talking about, whether it's in your own writing, whether it's in a published book, whatever it is, you show and you tell, you explain either why you're doing that as a writer, why that writer was doing it. You show and tell, and then encourage them to use that in their writing as needed. I will say the pitfall here is, as teachers, a lot of times we want to teach a lesson and then say, now go do this. And we have to kind of let that go, because sometimes you're going to present something to your students that they don't need right at that moment. Okay, I might be in the midst of revising something, but I'm not really ready for editing yet. Somebody else might be in a pre-writing stage of writing. And so it might not be a go do this right now. It might be like, this is a tip, tuck it in your pocket for when you need it, right? Or something that you can come back to. But it's very short. So I keep focus and mini because it helps me to remember, but a little mini lesson. And then your students need lots of time to engage in authentic writing activities. So this independent writing time might include researching or reading to inform what they're writing. Reading in a genre that they're trying to learn how to write in. If somebody asks me to write an op-ed piece, I'm going to spend some time engaged in reading other people's well-done op-ed pieces before I'm going to try to write in that genre, right? Or it might just be time to think. Sometimes we forget to honor that in our students, that they might need time to think about their writing. I've seen so many classrooms, right, where it's like, okay, this is what we're going to write, now go write. And as if the words are just going to come like that. It doesn't work that way. And Professor Hidalgo, you shared, you worked with people who they're able to write a paper in an hour and you need 4. And that is true for our students as well, right? So we need to honor that people's writing processes look different, and they might need a little more time to think to get going. They might need some time, especially if we're talking about elementary students. And I know some of you have that experience as well, but they might need time to do some drawing or some other way, like to get their ideas flowing. And we need to honor that. So we give some independent writing time. During that time, that's the time as a teacher where I'm touching base with my students as writers, where I can give some feedback. Okay, not criticism, but like feedback for them to grow as a writer. And we can definitely do that in the virtual world. The breakout rooms are awesome for that, right? Your students can be working independently, just engaged in writing in their breakout room, or even in small groups if they need to talk with each other. And you can have time to meet one-on-one with students and encourage them during that time. And then a few minutes of share time as a whole group, like as a community of writers, like, what are you working on in your writer's notebook right now? What's the idea that you're playing with or you're working on, or what are you envisioning for this piece that you're working on? Just getting some writerly talk in the room. And what that does is it opens us up to lots of different ideas when we hear what other people are doing. We're like, well, I hadn't thought about doing that, right? So our writers pick up ideas just like we do as teachers from each other. But it also communicates, this writerly language, this shared sense of purpose and goals, and kind of goes back to the affective domain that I was talking about, the affective domain, where we're trying to develop a place where we communicate that we're valuing them and that we want to hear what they have to say, and that just supports them as humans, but as writers also. All right, so your own particular class setup, it may not be where you could do this, certainly not every day, but just kind of keep those three main components in mind. We know that those contribute to growing healthy writers. Okay, and then what we teach when it comes to teaching writers kind of fall into two camps here. So we might do some of what we would call process studies, where we talk about the writerly life, like what does it mean to be a writer and to like gather ideas and to grow those ideas into a writing project. It might be teaching our students how to do solid research, like what that means, like, to find good resources, things like that. Teaching them to observe, teaching them to be listening out, and again, I think that just supports their growing ideas. Engaging in writerly talk with other writers to support yourself as a writer. This would include giving our students an overview of what the writing process is. And I say very specifically here, it's an overview of the writing process, because where my strongest teaching of writing process comes in is when students are writing, right? So I think that we all need to have like an overview. So like at the beginning of the year, I do an overview of what the writing process is so that we have common language, okay, for what I'm talking about when I say, what part of the writing process are you doing a draft? Are you pre-writing? What are you doing? We need that common language. But I can't possibly teach them all the ways to use the writing process in an isolated form. That has to be done like when we're studying a certain genre, because the way that I pre-write for poetry is so totally different than the way that I pre-write for, say, a persuasive piece or a research paper, right? So I can't teach you everything about pre-writing like in this one like isolated session, but we need that common language so that as we're studying different genres and learning to write in different ways, then we can apply that. Okay, so what does pre-writing look like here, right? If I'm comparing two characters in a literary analysis, that might look like a Venn diagram, right? Or if I'm trying to make an argument that's it's going to be more laid out like this. I'm going to go from this point to this point with my backup points here, right? But we need that overview so that we have that common language. Definitely, I teach my students how to use a writer's notebook as a tool for improving their writing so that we don't fall into that trap of like, oh, my day was so bad and this is all the things that happened, or my day was awesome and this is what happened, the end. But actually using it like, yeah, no, this isn't your diary. This is a tool. This is your playground for playing with writing. You always wanted to try writing a mystery. This is your place to do it. I'm not grading it. Just play. Just try something new, right? Or play with the ideas that you're thinking about doing for this paper that we have coming up, or whatever it is. Another process study, I would teach students how to have effective peer conferences, right? Model. And with your older students especially, you can play with like how not to, because they appreciate a good parody or a bad example. Like, what can we learn? This is how you should not do this. So I think this could be a lot of fun and definitely works in a virtual environment. If you have someone like Miss Lori or a co-teacher, or even a student, an older student who's willing to come in, and kind of do it like, let's have the worst peer conference ever, in front of my class. And then we'll talk about what makes for a good peer conference, right? But teaching them how to talk to each other, because what we'll find, and I find this in college too, largely with my undergrads, I will say, more than the graduate students, but you get them in writing teams and they're talking to each other about their writing. It's just like, oh, that's really great. I love that. And so I've started doing this with them, like where I do a model thing, where I'm like, okay, so I just totally love your piece. Isn't that awesome? It's so good. I mean, I just really felt it, right? And then I'll ask them, so what is that going to give you? Like, how does that inform your revision process? It doesn't. It's like you felt good in the moment, but it helped you not at all, right? So then I teach them effective strategies for actually communicating. I really did like this. This is why. Very specific, right? And then if we have common language, we're going to talk about the 6 traits. If we have some common language, you know, your organization worked really well for me. The way that you transitioned was it was subtle, but I got it. Like I totally got how you went from here to here, even though that was complicated. It was like a flashback, whatever, right? We can get really specific with the way that we talk to each other. Depending on the class that you're teaching, you might do a study on how to co-author with someone else, or you might have students who actually are interested in getting published. And there are ways for our K-12 students to get published. So there might be a study on that if that's an interest of your class. And again, like Annette was saying, like the needs of your classes vary, right? So the way that you do things isn't going to be the same from year to year. It definitely is reflective of the class that you have. Teaching your students to reflect on themselves as writers is also very important. Thinking about their own writing process, like how they developed a certain piece of writing. When I have my students, what I call publish, instead of turning in their final paper, I call it, okay, you're going to publish your paper, like it's ready to publish. You're ready for me to receive it or whoever you're writing it for. I also have them do a little writer's memo with it, where they tell me about their process, their inspiration, like where did you get this idea? How did you develop it? You know, did you write sitting outside in your hammock, or were you like sitting at your computer? Like what did you do? Like, and I think it's just good for them to think about those things, to know their process, and then it also helps them to grow. So those are just some process related study examples that we might study as we're learning about writing. The other thing, definitely there's product study examples. Right. So we can't ignore that there's going to be some kind of product when it comes to writing instruction. So I like to start off with an overview of various types of writing, right? Even if there are things that I'm not going to focus on in class, I think it's just important to get that out there in the world. There's a lot of types of writing. Get your students talking about what do they like to read? What genres do they like? What appeals to them? And then you can also introduce throughout the school year, different genres to them and different ways to do things. I think it's good for them to have that exposure. In the same way that we say we want our students to read widely and to be able to understand, comprehend a variety of kind of texts. Similarly, they need to be tuned in to there's various types of writing. And we need to have those explicit conversations because they don't always just pick up on, oh, that's a different kind of writing. I didn't realize it. And then depending again upon whatever you're teaching, you will have specific genre studies. I know in Virginia, where I am, different grade levels have specific genre studies that they do. The students are expected to be able to write in those genres during that school year, right? So that they get kind of a wide exposure over the course of their year. But some of those frequent flyers are, persuasive essays, personal narratives, drama pieces, op-ed pieces, memoirs, poetry, always in April. Poor poetry gets always designated to National Poetry Month, but I think poetry should be happening all year. But anyway, so definitely units of study in your course would be related to specific genres. And if you're teaching in a content area, right, like history, or another content area, then those genre studies might be very specific to your course. Like, whether you are writing about, from an historical aspect, or, perspective pieces, like I think someone touched on earlier, or even if you're letting them play with something like historical fiction or something, right? Those might be specific genre studies. One thing that I think is very important, and we will talk about, and hopefully, I feel like I need weeks with you guys. I want weeks, but teaching our students to read like writers is critical, right? So we want them to start looking at the world as a writer and learning to read, not just to read something for pleasure. I do want them to read for pleasure. I always tell them, read it for pleasure first. Don't ever try to read it like a writer the first go. Just read. You need to understand and comprehend what you're reading first. Let it have an impact on you. But then when you find something that's really well written, that really moved you, whether it's an article or a blog post or a book or whatever it is, as a writer, go back to that then and say, what was that writer doing? How did they do that? How did they make me feel that? Right? Like how my perspective shifted there. Sometimes it starts to shift and then I'm like, wait a second, no, I don't believe that, right? And I have to pull it back. But a really strong writer can make you, especially if they're writing first person, they can get into your head. And so how are they doing that? And if I'm trying to do something similar, how can I do that? So we want to teach our kiddos to read like writers. And then we also do specific craft studies. Okay, like the 6 traits of writing, which we're going to touch on, and other crafting strategies that authors use. And there's vary, right? Like if I'm writing persuasive pieces, there's rhetorical devices, right, that we use when we're doing persuasive writing, things like that. That would fall into specific craft study. And I also like to teach my students how to find mentor authors for their writing, if there's a particular genre, especially that they like. It's good for them to study like bodies of work by people, when that's available, and learn how to write in that way, in that style. Any thoughts or questions about the different kinds of studies that we might engage in as we teach writing? Okay, so now we're going to talk about those journals, and I don't call them journals. I do call them writer's notebooks, and exactly for that reason, because I think we get bogged down in the journaling. It's my private thoughts, and we need to kind of let go of that a little bit. The writer's notebook is an authentic tool for gathering writing ideas, and it's a place to play with writing. And this is how I present it to students. It needs to be separate from the notes you're taking for class. It needs to be separate from other things. Now, I do often, just for the sake of ease, like I will have my students, if they have a composition book, for example, I have them clip like the first 20 pages, just like clip the corners off to save that front part for gathering writing ideas, and then the rest of it for just writing. Again, I know we're kind of all teaching in different situations, so it varies like on how you might use a writer's notebook. I would strongly recommend, like where you're able to have your students writing, at least 10 minutes would be like a minimum, like 20 minutes would be better for our older writers for sure, like as time to actually work through. They had longer than I would love to. When I had my own classroom and I was like doing in-person instruction, like I tried to get 30 to 40 minutes where they were just writing. Now, it wasn't always just writing in their writer's notebook, right? There's all those other writerly activities that they were doing. That time to really dwell on their writing. I share pieces from my own writer's notebook to kind of get them going and to understand. There's also writers on YouTube who will talk to you about how they use their notebooks and things like that, because your writer's notebook can have a variety of things in it. Lori,
You're always going to have students, when you tell them to write for 30 minutes, they're going to write for 5 or less and be done. So what do you do about that?
You have to build stamina. It's just like if I said, I'm going to go run the 5K, next month. I can't just decide that I'm going to do that and I'm going to just show up there, right? Like, it's like there's stamina building, and writers need that too. And especially if they haven't been doing a lot of writing by the time they're at middle and high school, start with 5 minutes.
Okay, but you're still talking about the perfect student. You're always going to have students who are just, do you say, I need to see 5 paragraphs, a minimum, or do you just say, if they just get 2 sentences out, you call it a day and it's okay?
That's a student that I would want to talk to. What else? So read to me what you wrote. Oh, I would love to hear more about that, right? Like those are kids that we have to connect with. Okay. And that we're going to have to spend time with. And that's where, if you had it set up where the rest of your students are, feeling fairly independent, you have that time to do that, you're still always going to have people who come through, and that touches back on that motivation and conation. There are some things that we have no control over. I guess. you knowing the student will in some ways determine how you deal with that. Like, is this some kind of power issue? I'm asking you to do it, so you're not doing it. You're afraid to do it. You don't have the skills to do it. What, I guess you would need to, I would want to know more, like what's happening here.
Lori, I think that's why it's really important that writing doesn't start in high school.
Yes,
or
agreed.
in junior high. This is one thing that I have found.
You start in
that-
kindergarten or
Yes,
before.
a lot of kids come to high school, and then the high school teacher is expected in the time frame that they have, teach them all about writing. Writing should be done across the curriculum, beginning way down in elementary school. Even little hands that can only draw a picture tells a story. And when you're reading to kids, you are actually teaching writing. You're not doing it as a focused discipline at that point, but you're telling a story. And students are, so it's important that we don't, because sometimes I think we get to the high school level and then we push because we're trying to get them ready for college, and the kids hate that. They really hate that. They're not used to writing. So I think too, we have to shift our thinking a little bit here, and we have to also write across the curriculum. Writing isn't just associated with English class. You write in math. There are math word problems. You write in history when you're answering questions. You write in Bible class when you are studying different text or different Bible characters, and you're responding to that. So I think the earlier we start that writing process, it will be less intimidating. Kids will be used to it. And we can start introducing some of that vocabulary when they're in elementary school.
Definitely.
They guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's our goal. I mean, that's why we're having this today. That is our goal, and we're already instituting changes. But I'm just simply talking about there. I think even, I have students that say, I am not going to college. I'm doing this because my parents are making me. And sometimes you're just going to have those students.
Yeah.
And they're going to be difficult to reach. Jacqueline, your hand was up.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add to what she was commenting about writing across curriculum and starting them early, that if we were to find a set writing process, instead of each teacher kind of bringing their own writing process and writing, because we usually teach the way we have learned in the past. So if as a whole we come up, okay, the first, lectures, the vocabulary, the terms, everybody knows what a writing notebook is, the pre-writing, the drafting, the editing, the revising, the sharing, that structure. If it starts in kindergarten and it goes through every single grade, so by the time they get to high school, it's second nature to them. But it's the same all across, because we can teach writing in one grade, and in the next grade, you're still teaching writing, but then that teacher brings in her own writing method, which may be similar to what we're using, but maybe they might use, instead of calling it, I don't know, pre-writing, they call it a rough draft, or, something like that, or a first draft, or simple terms like that. So, staying with the same terms all across the levels also helps them have this become second nature to them.
Yeah, I agree. Like having common language and those threads throughout is critical. You're always going to have students who are coming from somewhere else, anyway, like there's always going to be that. Lori, one thing that comes to mind, like when you have kids who are like, well, I'm not going to college, I'm not whatever. And again, we cannot single-handedly like change anyone's motivation, right? What we can do, if we start seeing that like as a common thread, like how do we expose these kids to the idea that you actually need to know how to write for pretty much any field that you go into anymore? You need to be able to communicate in writing, whether that's just emails with your boss or whatever that is. And sometimes I share this story when I was getting my my certification as a literacy specialist. It was part of a class that I took, but it was also part volunteer work. I went into the Richmond City Jail and we did some tutoring. And the gentleman that I was working with there, he was taking classes while he's in jail. It's a great time to go back to school. A lot of them end up, being able to do that. And so he was taking some classes and trying to learn how to write. And he shared with me some of his background and how he was very skilled, like at repairing things. Like he understood like how appliances and stuff work, like something that I am not skilled in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, thank goodness for YouTube helping me do some handy things around the house. But he was very skilled in this way, and he had a great job with this apartment complex, fixing things. But they changed to a system where the service orders would come in by computer, right? Like by email or whatever system they had. And then when he was done, he was expected to kind of write up what had happened and all this stuff. Well, this man was functioning on a first grade level as far as literacy goes, reading and writing. And so you can imagine, not only is he not able to really understand what's coming at him, but he was not able to do that. He lost his job as a result. He couldn't perform. And that was that's a pretty basic example, but I don't think it's an extreme one, right? Unless you're just flipping burgers at McDonald's, you're probably going to need, and I shouldn't say just flipping burgers. Thank goodness for everybody who's willing. I don't eat burgers, but people who are willing to work in service industries and working in service industries to keep things going. We're appreciative, but at the same time, like pretty much any job that you want to do that's going to have some meaning for your life, you're going to need to be able to communicate in writing. Now, lecturing our students on that is probably not going to make a difference, right? So how do we do that? Maybe, talking to other people, having guests come in, I don't know, who are talking about their field. Maybe this particular student is really interested in science or math, maybe having somebody come in and talk about that. And hey, by the way, when you're here, can you please make sure to mention how important writing is to what you do, on a regular basis, those kinds of things. There are ways that we can get those ideas in the classroom and try to support students' motivation. It's not an easy fix. There's not an easy answer to that. And some of them will just be doing it because they have to, because of their grade. That's just the reality.
Mrs. Laurie, Coach, I was going to mention that even when you're flipping burgers, if you want to have any type of manager position, you will have to learn how to write reports.
Yep.
So you are correct, it's all over the labor field,
Yeah.
except if you don't want to get near to any manager position.
Yeah, and I would imagine most of our kids have higher sights, right? They want, even if they think they're not going to need to write, they have their eyes set on something,
Very true. Yeah.
And I talk to them too, like about how things like maybe they like to listen to podcasts or things like that. And like that stuff doesn't just come out of people's mouths. Like they are writing. There's all this writing that's in the background. Every movie that you enjoy watching, every TV program, there's writers right behind that. Like there's literacy is critical. Same thing, if you songwriting, like there's writing and there's always writing behind all of these things that kids appreciate and enjoy. And even if, you want to work for Twitter, Elon Musk, you're going to need to know how to write, right? Like, even if you're the bomb with computers and with programming and with, like you still need to know how to write. And so that might be a bigger picture. Like, how do we make sure that kids know that what we're doing is relevant, right? That's a big, it's like we're touching the very tip of that iceberg. That's a big thing. And I'm not sure that, I don't know that there's like one answer to that.
Yeah.
But
I was kind of looking to see if you had any, like, for those kids that just are going to do the bare minimum, do you set a maximum or do you set a bare minimum? But you really don't, I guess, from what I hear you saying.
again, I think it depends on the kid. And like, because sometimes, I've had situations where just making that connection, building that relationship, giving some of the positive feedback that they need makes a difference. And sometimes it doesn't. Like I've had it where, and I'm hopeful that somewhere it does still make a difference, but it doesn't seem to maybe in that moment. And then we just come to an agreement. Okay, well, this is what's required for this class. And even if you don't see the bigger purpose, you may someday, but this is what's required. I think it's hard to say like, oh, well, you're going to have 5 paragraphs by the end of this or whatever. Because like we were saying earlier, I think different people write at different rates. And I might be able to come out with like, you know, a paragraph and a half of like really quality writing. Whereas like Mrs. Reese may be able to write 3 pages, right, in the same amount of time of quality writing. Like we're just different, you know, different writers write differently. So there's like this fine line of how am I honoring that, right? But also, are you pushing yourself? Are you, you know, I mean, 1 to 2 sentences, I would think that most of our students could do more.
Gotcha.
And I would hope that if they learn that we're not going to tell them what to write about, and we give them some tools for learning how to choose their own writing topics, that sometimes that helps. I know that's helpful, you know, for my own kids. So Nathan was very excited. He wasn't so excited about writing realistic fiction. I think he feels a little intimidated by realistic fiction, maybe just a little, Mrs. Reese, but he's very excited and has a story idea already because he gets to pick his own story, like to write in that. So he gets to pick the topic. He gets to create his own characters. So that's motivating to him, where he's, you know, my daughters love to write. They're writer girls, like their mama, but he's, you know, not so much. He's got great ideas. He can tell stories. He's a storyteller, but, you know, getting it down is a different thing. But definitely, I think helping them learn how to pick their own topics is super motivating. And I want to get there. I'm going to share this presentation. I'll share it with Lori later, and then she can like maybe send it out, because I want to make sure that the link is like one where everybody can access it. When you get it, if you want to read from Ralph Fletcher, is a writer, and he writes a lot about writing in addition to being a writer himself. He writes about writing. And I pulled for you a chapter from one of his books. And this chapter is all about the writer's notebook. It's called A Love Affair with Words. And it's just a great piece. And I could share this with high school students for sure. Maybe even excerpts like with middle school students, if I wanted to talk about what writers do in their writer's notebooks. But it's just it's an easy read, and has some good stuff in there that I think you'll appreciate as you're thinking about the writer's notebook. And I also teach my students, like, your writer's notebook, sometimes it's just drawing. Sometimes it's like just expressing an opinion. It doesn't have to be like some fantastical big thing. Just if you can't think of something to write about, tell that story that your family always tells, like to other people. Oh, remember the time, you know, or the kind of story that you tell to your friend, right? Like, what are you telling to somebody? We were in person. What are you telling to your friends in the cafeteria? What stories are you guys telling? Those kinds of things. Right? They can write about just anything. Again, if they're doing any kind of writing, it's good. I also tuck a lot of things into my writer's notebooks, such as like excerpts from other books, little articles, artifacts, like things that I want to remember that might be something I want to write about later, like a note from someone, or a note that I made to myself, tickets for events that I've been to that I might want to write about, brochures, something that was interesting to me. Your writer's notebook can just be this cool place to collect all kinds of stuff that might spark your writing, or it might not. It might just sit there. That's okay too. Writers do that. We have a lot of things tucked away that we may never actually get out and play with. Very central to this idea that we're talking about that has to do with motivation and has to do with getting our kids writing is teaching them how to gather ideas for writing. I was totally going to have you guys, I'm looking at my time, so I'm probably going to restrict a little bit here, but I was going to have us really go into where do you think writers get their ideas from, but we're just going to talk about it really quick. Discuss that with your students though. If you're teaching reading, or if you're reading something in class, content related, or if you're teaching writing, talk to them like, where do you think writers get their ideas? These are not questions that we always have the direct answer to. Sometimes we do. Sometimes writers are on YouTube, or they've written how they got their idea. You know, there's whole books, I think, published about Tolkien and how he got his ideas for writing The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and things like that. So sometimes we know where writers got their ideas, right? Sometimes we don't. But it's really not the knowing or the not knowing that matters. It's really the idea that writers get their ideas from somewhere. And hey, I can do that too. This is what we want our kids to think of. We feel like that maybe that's assumed understanding, but I don't think it always is. With some kids, they just think, well, writers are writers, and so they just write stuff, right? It's like, no, these ideas are coming from somewhere. And you have ideas, you have experiences, you have things that you can write about as well. Okay, so having those conversations is critical. Okay, we can't just say writers get their ideas from. We need to have the conversations because that's where our brains change, right? When we engage kids in conversation, they start thinking and reflecting and answering and responding. Then they're making those connections. If they're just sitting there passively taking in whatever you're saying, we're not seeing the same brain changes that we'll see if they're engaged. Things that you might end up talking about with your students. Writers get ideas from their life experiences, from their memories, from dreams. Those might be actual dreams or those might be aspirations, right? From family stories, from other writers' works, we get ideas. From our opinions on things, from things that we wonder, from our interests, our passions, things that we care about, our observations of the world that are both beautiful and maybe troubling observations of the world, those stories that you always tell, those things that you believe, your deeply held beliefs. Those are all things and so many more that writing inspiration can come from. Go, Lori.
Lori, going back to what you said previously to have this writer's notebook, do you feel like that needs to be handwritten on paper?
I
Or
do.
do you think okay, you do.
And that would be a totally separate workshop, but we have, there is evidence and you can look it up. This has long been around, but there's empirical, like research, I don't know if I want to use the word empirical. There's research evidence. There's plenty of it that's showing that when we handwrite something, it has a different effect on our brain. There's different neurons firing, different connections being made than when we're typing. And this holds true for college students taking notes, those who are taking notes like on their laptops versus those who are taking notes by hand. Their performance and their recall is better, as well as their ability to demonstrate deeper understandings and connections. Your students, obviously in digital world here in virtual world, will need to, when they're submitting like drafts and things, they're going to need to type those up. But this like just kind of daily active writing and even maybe doing their rough drafts, I think should be done by hand.
They can take pictures though. But one more question then. So I'm taking notes right now on my iPad with a pen. Does that count as pencil and paper? Because we do have.
That's a good question.
You know,
I don't know. That's a good question. If it's the act of doing that, I would assume that it would be similar to pencil to paper.
all right.
Yeah, that's a great, I don't know. This would be a great time to study that, right?
Yeah.
At the bottom of my slide here, I put no prompts, and I firmly believe in no prompts. For students who are used to having prompts, you might need to, like we were talking about with Annette, you might need to take some steps to getting away from that. But if you teach them how to gather their own writing ideas, then they will become less dependent on you for giving them writing ideas. And so I've got this slide with 15 minutes. I was going to have you try one, but I'm just going to talk to you instead. This is just, this is a handful of some try it's. So during like a mini lesson, a focus lesson, I would present the idea that writers, we talk about writers getting ideas. Where do they come from? Here's an activity you could try for ideas. And I might do one of these activities with my students, like during a lesson, just one. And then I might do another one another day, another one another day. Getting them to try it, just to spend a few minutes. None of these things would take up all of their writing time. It would just be an activity to walk them through. And then I love to have these on hand. I love to have gone through these because then when my students, I don't know what to write about. Oh, let's look in your writer's notebook. Tell me, let's go back to your ideas section. What have you added there? What are some things? Anything inspiring? We still don't know what to write about. Okay. So what are you reading lately? What are you noticing? I don't know. I don't cave into I'm going to tell you what to write about, because you have life, you have experiences, you have opinions on things. You can observe the world just as well as I can. It's up to you to know what to write. I don't know what you should write. And that's just the reality. I don't. I might be a teacher, but I don't have this magical book of I know what everybody should be writing about. I don't. You should write about things that matter to you. So just quickly, I'll just kind of give you like just a little preview, because I think any of these you could probably read what I've got here and figure it out. But sometimes I'll have them share an artifact, and I always keep it super basic because I want it to be relevant and accessible. So I might share an artifact like my chopstick. Okay, so I know this doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, but I just have to tell you, like, my chapstick is so important to me, whatever. And it reminds me of the time when I went to the Grand Canyon for real, and I lost my chapstick somewhere on the train or somewhere and I didn't have it. And then I might get to tell you fun stories about the Grand Canyon instead. It might lead to other memories, but it started with the chapstick, right? So sometimes little artifacts tie into bigger memories. So we might do a lesson on that. Where I can, I try to use literature. Picture books are great, even with your middle and high schoolers. I tell them, I'm not reading you this book because I think it's the right age for you. I'm reading it because I want you to get something about writing from it. Okay, so we're reading like writers. This is what grown-up writers do. We read like writers, so bear with me. And I use picture books. Mem Fox has a book that's great about memories. It's called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge. And it's a little boy. He shares like all these objects with this woman who his parents have said has lost her memory. And each of the objects kind of reminds her about something in her past. So I use that one with that. So wherever I can, I tie books to it. But even if you didn't, have the kids share something and the memory that goes with it. What you don't want to do is turn this into a writing prompt. Say, okay, now you have to go write about that. Don't do that. What you say instead is, okay, now you have an idea for writing. You put this idea down in your notebook. You have an idea that you might decide to develop later. You might. You don't have to, but you might. Same with experiences or family stories. I'll have them just like sketch, like in your writer's notebook. Sketch like it looks like a Polaroid frame, right? Draw a little picture in there that relates to something you've done with your family or tradition, that you have or whatever. You might want to write about it later. That's it. I don't tell them they have to write about it. You might want to write about it later or write about some of those things later. This slide is linked. There's an explanation more of what life maps and graphs are, but this is kind of a way you put some of those big life experiences on that you might want to write about later. I also like heart maps and word clouds. I like heart maps, but sometimes, we'll be real, middle and high schoolers, they think they're too cool for a heart. If they're not too cool, just have them sketch a heart and they can section it off, or they can just fill it with sketches or words, related to the things that matter the most to them, the things that are in their hearts, right? So those ideas, beliefs, people, places, their pets will inevitably be there that are meaningful to them. Your kids who are too cool for the heart, just let them do like a cloud, just a word cloud, but it can also be little images. And I think those I always go back to if like we're writing poetry, go back to your heart map. What are the things that matter to you? Those are the things that you should be writing about. Teaching them to be observant. So practicing that like in class, Ms. Velez would love this. She does this with her science classes anyway, right? Like observe an object, tell all the details you can tell about it. Teaching our kids to observe things. You can start with things, but also teaching them to observe people and nature, noting those details and associations that they make. Sometimes I'll just send my students out like for a walk. Like, okay, if we're in virtual world and if they're the right age and it's safe for them to do it, like go take a walk. 15 minutes. I want you to take a walk and I want you to make observations, take your notebook with you, right? And I teach them like focus on 5 senses for all ages, like think sensory details. What do you notice? And then if there's an association with it, I teach for Virginia Commonwealth University. And so this is like in the city of Richmond. And so when I have my undergrads go take an observation walk, my example is like, okay, so I know if I walked in this direction, I would be passing by the Red Eye Cookie Company and I would be smelling cookies, and it's going to remind me of making cookies with my kids, actually, is what it reminds me of now. And so I tell them, like, if there's an association with something you observe, note that so that could help you prompt some writing later if that's what you wanted to write about, right? Like, don't just write down, I smelled the cookies, like write down whatever like association came to mind. I encourage my students to keep an ongoing, and I do this myself, a wonder list, things you want to know more about, but that you feel like you don't have time to go look at right now. Like I listened to the Daily Audio Bible every day, and we're in Ezekiel, and this description of the temple and like the porticos and the parapets. And I was like, oh man, I remember taking like an art history class back in college. I knew all these architectural terms, and I want to go back because I can't remember the difference between like an Ionic capital, and I'm like, I want to go back and do that, but I don't have time to do that right now. So that goes on my wonder list. Go back and review like what you used to know about ancient architecture, but I model that for my students, like keep that wonder list, because that makes for great writing later when you have time in class, hey, my teacher said I can work on whatever I want to work on right now. I can go research that and I can write about that in my notebook. Another quick activity I do is I have them sketch some simple window panes, and each window pane is to give us a little peek, like a little look into your life. It's not supposed to sound creepy. Give us a little look into your life. Like, so in one window pane, you know, if you have a sport that you like or a hobby, you know what I mean? Or write about your pets in one, or draw, talents, interests, things like that. And always, always resist the temptation to turn these into writing prompts, which is hard for us as teachers, I think, myself included, because I do want to tell, okay, now go pick one and write about it. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about that, but we just have to let them make those decisions sometimes. Okay, so those are just some things like to get you started. I could teach, and I do teach a whole class on teaching, you know, kids how to gather writing ideas, but there's like, that's my best of right there. Those are my best ones that I get the most success with. And once you've taken some time to build that into their writer's notebook, you will have a reduced number of kids saying, I don't know what to write about. Tell me what to write about, right? You're trying to build them up. And I think that it also communicates something very important. It communicates the idea that we believe in them, that we honor and value their life experiences, which might be very different from our own. Just like all of us in this Zoom right now, we all have very different backgrounds and experiences, but all so much to bring to the table, right? Valuable in different ways. And so when I take this idea of gathering ideas and I put it on my kiddos, that you have things to write about, I think it helps to build that atmosphere where they're more comfortable to share their writing, more comfortable to put things into words, because they know that I do care. I actually want to know about their lives. So I wanted this to be more interactive, but I'm like watching the clock go. So I'm going to try to hit on some other big highlights here. And then maybe I can, again, share some resources, or maybe we can get together another time, because I feel like there's a lot to talk about here. As I touched on earlier, you want to have a common language and understanding, so that as you're working as writers in whatever capacity, depending on what you're teaching, you want to have this common language of the writing process, and the writing process that writers use in their work as writers. It's not the goal or the focus of the writing work, which I think sometimes we're confused, like, okay, it's a writing process. We have to like take something through these steps. It's a tool for students to use, this process, right? It starts with our experience. And then just depending on the kind of piece that we're doing, the things that we do will vary, but it generally includes, not necessarily step to step, but rehearsing and pre-writing. Rehearsing's in the head. Pre-writing is if you get it on paper before you write. Doing some form of drafting. I strongly recommend that if you're not doing it yet, giving your students space to share and confer about their writing, to get audience feedback while they are still in the writing process stage, not publishing yet. They can get feedback from each other, from you, but they need to get some feedback. Like, that's going to inform their revision process, right? Revising is a very important piece. We do know, again, from this like growing body of research, which I think is so exciting, we know that pre-writing and revising, if we teach students how to do that well, those are just huge. All of it matters, but those are the most important if we can teach them to do those well. And then we teach them about, using a good editing process, and then publishing, whatever that means in your classroom, right? However they're publishing, however you like things done. Like, do you like, do you want them to add images? Do you like to have a cover page? Whatever that means. There's a lot of things that could mean, but we all need to have that common language when we're working together. And they also need to understand what the 6 traits of writing are. These are descriptions of aspects of effective writing. The traits vary in the way that they look with genre, purpose, and audience, but they're always there. And they make the writing process make sense. I did not know how to teach kids how to revise until I had the 6 traits, until I understood. And when I learned about them, it was eye-opening, and I finally knew how to teach revising well. I won't say that I wasn't trying and had some ideas, but I wasn't doing it well, because I really didn't know how to help a kid develop voice if it wasn't there, right? And I didn't even always know how to, maybe help them maximize their, really showcasing their ideas. The 6 traits give us a way to do that. So we were going to do an activity next. I'm cutting it. I'm sorry, but I will talk to you briefly about the 6 traits. The 6 traits are ideas, organization, voice, word choice, sentence fluency, and conventions. The reason for teaching them is that they help us build our understanding and skill as writers. It gives us that common language. It informs, like our students wouldn't know how to confer, like they don't know what to say besides good job, right? Unless they know 6 traits. If they know the traits, then they can talk to each other about their organization, about their word choice, about their fluency, right? They can be super specific. I could really hear your voice. I could tell that this was important to you as I listened to you read your paper, right? They can be specific with one another, which informs then our writing process. It also promotes our thinking and reflection. It helps us to look at our own work. Is my voice strong? Have I used my best word choice here, right? Is my vocabulary effective? Can I upgrade some of these words? It helps readers connect, it helps connect reading and writing, and it empowers those students as writers to be able to take charge over their work. They can understand what these are and say, yeah, I can do that in my work. I have a slide for each of the traits, but I'm not sure. Like, I feel like we're pushing the time and you guys are on break. And so I don't want to take away from your break. And I feel like I've been talking and talking. This has been my challenge over the last weeks as I've been thinking about what I was going to share with you. And I'm like, I have years of things that I want to tell you. And I teach a semester length course on teaching writers at the university level. And I'm trying to condense this into 2 hours. I was like, that's just not going to happen. But I was trying. I feel like there's a lot more.
You did great, Lori. You did great. But yeah, I can see there's so much more to know. You haven't even, so
I feel like we've scratched the surface.
Right. At some point, we've got to teach MLA format.
Uh-huh.
And all and APA and all of that kind of thing. Do you incorporate it into this?
Yeah, so that's one thing. Let me talk to you just super quickly, because this is what we end up doing, right? We teach genres. And so I would need those for certain genres that I'm writing in, right? Where I'm needing to have citations in text and then do my end of paper citations. And so with any genre study, your students need time to read in that genre. It is unfair to ask somebody to write in a genre that they are not familiar with, right? So we spend time reading in that genre, then we do some close study of well-written text within that genre. Okay, so if I'm doing like persuasive writing, I might pull out like Martin Luther King Jr.'s like letter from a Birmingham jail, right? Like there's some great rhetorical devices that he uses and he's a great writer. So I might pull out some things like that for us to study before I ask them to write in the genre. But if you're using a genre where they're going to use some quotations and need to know that, that's when I teach that. That's one of my mini lessons is during that genre study. Is okay, we're working with a genre, whether it's research or whatever it is, we're working with a genre where you're going to want to include quotations. So one of my mini lessons is going to be how to do quotations well, like not just plunk them in. You know, anybody who works with writers, you've seen this, right? They'll just like drop it. Like they just drop this quotation and they don't know how to like segue in or out. So we learn how to do that. And we learn how to do whatever style that we're working with. And those would be the focus of my mini lessons during that study.
One more question.
So, and go ahead.
Teaching grammar. How do you teach grammar from writing?
That was the other thing I wanted to say, in context as they need it. Okay, in context, because what happens, we can teach you grammar rules and everything all day long, like up front, I can give you worksheets and whatever. But what we know is that doesn't transfer to our writing. Okay, we would like to think that it does, but it doesn't. When it transfers is like what we were talking about with Professor Hidalgo earlier, is when a student needs it, like when they're in their work and you see like they're trying to combine sentences, but they don't know how to do that. Then we talk about complex sentence structure. We talk about the different kind of sentences and how if I'm using a coordinating conjunction, I need a comma before that coordinating conjunction. You know, when I'm joining two independent clauses, these are when the phrases are going to make sense to them. These ideas is when they're using them. If we try to do it all up front and front load it, it doesn't work. And I do have the research like to back that. I didn't put any of that in my presentation today, but I can give you, I have notes here somewhere. I can give you that if you're interested in reading more about that, but it just doesn't.
That's fine. I just wanted, yeah.
Yeah, what we do know does work And we're getting more data on that. It's, again, writing is this field like where there's constantly, stuff coming in. But what we do know that works, that we have seen a positive result with, is when you teach it in the context of students' own writing and what they need. And I think it's great to have well-written examples, like to show, look how the writer did this. They could have done this as 2 separate sentences, right? But they put it together, and do you see the impact and how they punctuated that, whatever it is, right? Do it in context. How are you using that in your writing? Because a lot of times we'll see students trying to do that, especially if they're readers. You'll see them using complex sentence construction, but not always using it well. I call it like using but confusing. And those are our teachable moments, when they're using but confusing, right? When they're using complex sentence structures but not having the tools to do it well, that's our teaching moment. And that's when they're going to learn from it. And they can learn how that strengthens their voice and their point in what they're trying to say. So.
Becky has it.
So my question, excuse my voice again. My question is, we have a list of objectives we have to teach, and it requires us to teach those grammar principles. If a child never gets to the point where they need to know that because they haven't learned, what do we do? How do we make sure we meet the objectives that are required? What do you do with that?
I mean, at some point, I have never run across like something that they would need that would be in an objective that they haven't needed. Although I can certainly fathom that could happen. There are some things that just all students need to know, right? And so you could teach a general lesson, and if they have writing in their notebook, then it's always applicable. You can always send them back to their own writing in some format or another. If you're just doing it isolated with no writing context for them to go look, right? Like I might teach them, I don't know, give me something. Give me a positive, like noun phrases. I don't know, what do we want to talk about here? But let's say there's something like that, right? And I can send them back to their notebook. Did you use commas around when you added extra information when you're writing about my brother who plays basketball? Whatever, like, did you use commas there? Go back and look. If they don't have an example, it's okay. We can still talk about that and how they might do that in their work. Anytime that we can do it in context, though, it is more powerful. And that comes from brain theory, brain study, as well as what we know about working with writers, right? And what we're able to see makes an impact on them.
So when you're looking, like when you do your mini lesson, your focus lesson, then would you address those things? Maybe they don't have it in their writing, but you would at least would have spoken about it. So it's in their vocabulary, so it's in their understanding. Maybe they don't have it in their writing. So that way you're teaching the objective. Is that right?
Yeah. And I would look and see what is the objective and where is it going to make sense for me to do it? Like, for example, like with sentence combining, where I might be teaching about using semicolons or coordinating conjunctions, right, to join independent clauses. I would teach that with sentence fluency, right? Like if I'm teaching them about the traits, and we know that teaching about sentence combining is actually, it's one of these things that's shown up in research. Like it has a positive impact on students' ability to write well. And so that would be lessons. It would be more than one lesson. That would be lessons that I would teach about writing, more complex sentences. And I might do that by reading a passage to them, like starting off with a really choppy passage because it has like little short sentences. And then talking about, okay, well, you guys, let's talk about like, what can we do to make this flow better? How could it sound better? And start guiding them toward, if they're not coming up with it, guide them towards, okay, well, we could put these two ideas together. They go pretty well together. How could we do that? We have options. I could use the semicolon. I could use a coordinating conjunction. We have options to do this. Or I could drop some words out and just make it one longer, but still just a simple sentence. Even if they don't have it in their notebook, if you're doing it with them and they're involved, they're going to make those connections better than if you tell them about it and give them a worksheet to do it. We just know that, like, that's stuff that is being, kind of validated across the board in the literature review that I've done as far as related to that recently.
Okay.
Would you not ever say, okay, everybody write a paragraph, and I want you to include at least one positive in there?
No, but I might say, everybody grab your writer's notebook and, find a place where you've written about somebody and we can add some extra information about them. And then, do a little carrot. Here's how we edit. I want you to do a carrot, and this is how we could do it. And if they literally don't have anything, then I might just say, yeah, okay, so let's come up with an example.
I have another question if I can, real briefly.
Yeah.
So I've done writers workshop before with really young children, and I struggled to always move them forward. They kind of got stuck. They love the pre-writing. How do we give them the structure, even at the junior high level? How do we give them the structure to keep them moving forward and then to give them an authentic grade?
Yeah, no, I love that. So when I do, and this is another thing that I wish we could do a whole workshop on, like I use an inquiry process with teaching genre, right? Because I want them to read in that genre. And then they have to start, and we talk about what kind of pre-writing makes sense for whatever genre we're doing. And again, it's going to vary, but what kind of pre-writing would make sense here? Why is that preferable to something else, kind of thing? And then I have deadlines for them. I call these process pieces. I would have a deadline, like you have a few days here. You don't have to do it today. I'm not going to send you, to your break room. You don't have to do it today, but you need to have this aspect of it done. I don't usually collect pre-writing. I try to okay, you do that. But like a draft, I want to see your first rough draft. It's due on this date, and they get points for turning in the rough draft, not for the quality of it. I just have to say, I need enough that I know where you're going with this. I need kind of a beginning, middle, end, if you will. I need to see where you're going. And then I can give feedback. And then I have them meet with a peer or with a team of peers to get feedback, to get audience feedback. And they have to make notes about, like, the audience doesn't read their stuff. I have my writers read their own work because I think the audience can just listen, give feedback, and then they have to turn in a revision based on that feedback, my feedback, and their own just decisions as a writer, how they want to revise. And they get points for the revision. Sometimes I'll have them turn in a second revision, like they'll meet with teams again with their revised piece, just depending on their needs as a group. Sometimes we'll just go through one revision process, and I give them points. So everything's building towards that final grade, and they're getting points for doing the process and really going through and trying to make it effective. And usually by the time we get to the published version, all the lessons in between, like, so my pre-writing lessons, like my mini lesson around that is all going to be all about using a graphic organizer and organizing my thoughts and everything on paper before I start writing, right? And then during drafting, it might be about like really trying to focus on getting my main idea out, making sure my voice is heard in there. And then when they're revising, I'm teaching lessons about word choice. I'm teaching lessons about fluency, right? But also about, is your organization working? Is your audience able to hear your idea? And they're getting that feedback from their peers. And then when it's getting towards where I know they need to start editing and getting ready to publish, then that's where all my editing lessons are coming in, whatever those kiddos need. And it's going to vary by your group, by your grade level, by your group, by the kind of writing that they're doing. But you've already seen their draft and their revision at that point. You kind of know what they need as a group, and you can address it as a group, or you know what they need like individually, and you can have those little mini conferences, while they're meeting, or writing or whatever they're doing. And I just kind of pace it out, when you need to have it in by. So I just pace it out. Turn in your rough draft, you get some points. Turn in your revision, you get some points. You get some points for meeting with your team and showing me evidence, like you made notes of what feedback you got. And so that then when it comes to the final piece, when we've done it in an inquiry study format where they've looked at quality pieces of writing in that genre, we come up together with a rubric. This is what, let's just go with personal narrative because that's super easy. This is what I should see in your personal narrative. There should be a strong storyline that I feel like I'm there in, right? There should be first person perspective. We're expecting that. There should be sensory details. There should be whatever you've taught, right? We kind of make this into like a group rubric. And I say, okay, this is, and mostly I like it to come from my students, but if they're new to that process, then I have to give a little more guidance. And then we decide, like, this is the rubric. This is what I'm going to grade you on. This is what I'm looking for, right? And these are the conventions that we've talked about. So I expect when you're using complex sentence structure, you know how to use the fanboys now, right? Like to those coordinating conjunctions, you know how to use that. I expect to see those commas before those coordinating conjunctions when you're joining independent clauses, because you know it. We've talked about it. And I try to create a rubric so that they know. And a lot of times too, especially if they're first starting working with a process like this, I will have them do a self-assessment. I also give them points for that. So you self-assess with the rubric, not just giving yourself a score, but telling me why you're giving yourself that score. Okay, you get some points for that on your final too. And so when it comes down to it, like the final piece is not like the only thing. They get credit for doing all the process in between. And then I ask them like to compare, look at your rough draft, like compared to your final. and they can see the effects of what a quality revision process and these writing processes really, they can see the impact of it. And I have seen that change the way that kids write, because so often they're just told, write about this, and they write about it and they turn it in, and that's it, without revision. And revision is so critical to learning how to write well. And if I didn't have the 6 traits, like I said, I didn't know how to really teach students how to revise well. I was doing all those things myself, but I didn't know how to explain what I was doing. I didn't even know how to critically think about what I was doing. Lucky me, I read a lot and I wrote well, but I didn't know how to explain that until I had the 6 traits language. And when I had the 6 traits language, it's like, oh, like I can teach you exactly what you need to be looking for and the things you need to try. And it's been just amazing. So, and I know that Lori has purchased the book that she and I talked about, Vicki Spandel, who is the one who kind of coined the term, the 6 traits. My book is so tattered, like it's falling apart. But that book has a ton of activities. I mean, I could teach a session on each trait, and I do when I'm teaching my undergrads. We spend one, afternoon, a 2-hour session on each of the 6 traits. Like, they each get their own afternoon, because there's so much there and there's so many great activities you can take your kids through to get them understanding it. And it's one of those things where you see light bulbs coming on, like they're like, oh, I always want, oh, okay. I didn't know, so it's empowering stuff. I wish we'd had time to dig in more to the 6 traits today, but I knew we're all coming from such different places. I was like, we got to have some comment. There's some things I need to make sure that I've covered before you can dive into that, because it's not one of those things where you can just put a prescriptive program into place. It's just not, because it varies on the class, the genres that you're studying. So it's more, it's a philosophy and an approach, I guess, more than a program. But I do hope this was helpful and not just totally overwhelming or me talking too much.
Very helpful, very inspiring. Thank you, Lori.
It's been very helpful. We really appreciate it. And I told them they could leave it in. So if anybody wants to go ahead and go, and if any of you have questions and wanted to say anything, you may go. Lori, no, it was wonderful. It's kind of the direction that we're wanting to go. And so it's a great start. Well, just knowing that really we shouldn't be giving journal assignments and
it's hard. And I think Annette made a really good point. If that's where you are, then that's okay. You can start to transition them away from that, right? But you have to teach them how to gather their own writing ideas before you'll be able to. Because if you don't teach them how to get ideas, some kids have their own ideas. They do, they're ready. But especially like your middle and high school students, if they've just been always told what to write, that's how they know how to write, So we have to just help them transition.
Dennis?
Yes, I was wondering, Lori, if we could meet with her later, perhaps individually or in smaller group, because I would like to test some of the practices that I have been using. In some occasions, they are actually on the other side of what she has been telling us. So I would like to hear a little bit more about that, if that is possible.
Yeah, I'm happy to meet individually, and I'm also happy to do some more sessions. I would love to, if people are interested in learning about the 6 traits and using those to help, kind of inform students' writing process. I would love to do that. I have lots of material on that. But also, just to kind of talk about writerly stuff, I'm always game. You might be able to tell I'm pretty passionate about this. It matters to me greatly for big picture reasons, and also, just kind of personal interest, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura, could you put your email?
Sure. Let me put it in the chat. That is my email address. And I'm also, like I said, I'm going to share my presentation with Lori when we're done.
And this is also been videoed, and it will be on our YouTube channel. So we'll send you the link, because you won't be able to get to it unless you have
Okay, and then the article that's linked in there about writers' notebooks, I think is great. I mean, once I started using that, it's not an article, it's a chapter from a book, but once I started using that with my undergrad students, like to really get them to get what they could do with this, it made a huge difference. And I think it would be perfectly appropriate for high school. It's an easy read. It's not difficult reading. It's not typical textbook stuff. So.
Anybody else have anything? So I'll get with you, Lori, and we'll talk again about a possible time when we could do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quick question. Which edition of the book by Vicki Spandel do you recommend?
The 6th edition
Okay.
should be her most recent, and it was published in 2013.
I got mine off of eBay for $30.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing here. I just was curious if it was a different edition would be equally
Yeah, but
effective.
you can find them for a lot more than that too.
I know.
Yeah, it was a big transition from the 5th to the 6th edition, which
Okay.
is why I would say just go with the 6th, because the 5th edition is just not, it was not nearly as practical and helpful. I didn't find it to be. The 6th edition has a lot of activities for each trait. It has a lot of student samples, like actual student work, and where she kind of analyzes how they're using that trait, which is so helpful as a teacher, right? When you think about assessing, like really seeing how it is in students' writing. So yeah, the 6th edition is the best. And unfortunately, I keep hoping the price will come down, but because it's still, I think, the most current edition, it's still,
I think $30 is bad on book.
yeah.
Good.
But
Title of
the
the book.
other thing I wanted to say is after talking about this, I think we need to switch. We spent a lot of time putting journals on, and so now we can change it to that lingo, and the kids can do the handwriting, and we can just have them upload it.
So you think we should have them take a picture of it and upload it as their journal for that day? Is that what you're thinking, Lori?
Or you could even do weekly that, you want the 4 journals put in Monday through Thursday, put it in on Thursday, and we want to see it all. But I think you have to have them uploaded. We can't trust them to just,
Exactly.
you've done your writing for today. Great job. We need to be able to see it. But it
The
doesn't
other
have
thing-
to be every
Lori,
day.
what is the title of the book?
The one that I was talking about with the 6 traits is Creating Writers, 6 Traits, Process, Workshop, and Literature by Vicki Spandel. And it is in the presentation that I'm going to show, it's in the references in the back. Spandel is good. I have listed in that presentation also some other writers. Georgia Hurd, Heard, Georgia Hurd has a great book on revision. It's like the revision toolbox, amazing activities you can do with your students and ways to help them learn about revising. She also has books on poetry and on writing great nonfiction. I'm a huge fan of Georgia Hurd, and all of her books are thin, they're accessible, and they probably are a lot cheaper than Vicki Spandel's book. Another writer that I recommend is Katie Woodray. She writes about the writing workshop, about words. Wondrous Words is one of her books. She's good. Ralph Fletcher, who is the chapter that I've linked in that presentation, is another writer that I like as far as if you're looking for books. But Georgia Hurd, if I had to pick, like I could only have these writing books, Georgia Hurd would probably be my one.
Lori?
She froze apparently.
Rose will be back in the thing.
Well, since we were waiting for her, I was wondering if any of you have used any of the grammar softwares.
What do you mean by that?
This is the thing.
Like Grammarly? Are you saying Grammarly or?
Yeah, exactly. Let me give you an example. By 2014, I was getting bogged down by many essays that were turned in by the students who were not very good at basic grammar, actually more than half. So I didn't have the time to go through all of that. So I gave them, you need to pass the Grammarly test for at least 90%. And I also warn them about some of the advices that they give, the software give, that are not necessarily the best.
Lori's back with us. Lori,
I
it's
know, I
hard, it's
blipped out.
difficult having two people with the same name. Every time I say Lori, I go, oh,
Yeah.
that's not me.
I know.
Not me this time.
Same. I was just doing my promotional plug. Jeff Anderson, he has a website too, but I love this book, Mechanically Inclined, because he'll cover just about anything you would need to teach, like pronoun antecedent agreement. Ms. Reese, I will confess, this is where I went when Nathan and I were learning about this the other week. Not that I didn't know how, but I was like, I wanted some literature examples. And so he gives you, like, you can use this text, you can use this passage. He tells you like what it is for some of us who have forgotten our mechanics and usage. He tells you what it is, gives some examples, gives some examples of common student errors, right? And then, you know, kind of activities or whatever for teaching that particular thing in the context of writing, which I think is just very helpful.
You have that in your list of references also?
I think I put Jeff Anderson's name, but I'm not sure I put the book. So I can add that title in there. He has several, but that is definitely like, that's my go-to when it comes to teaching stuff like that, because, you know, it's boring for mom to like just tell you, or your teacher to just like tell you what this is. But if you can put it in a passage and like, oh, that makes sense.
Yes. Okay.
Like with that example, Nathan and I talked about some funny, like if it's an unclear pronoun reference, you know, Jeff Anderson includes a kind of a funny.
Lori, I have one more question. I don't
Sure.
have more, but right now I have one more. Would you say for a language arts program, it should simply be writing?
So you guys are in this unique spot. I've been chewing on this for a few days. I was like, because really whoever's teaching reading is covering like comprehension and vocabulary, right? And those things. So your language arts teacher really is in a spot where you really could teach everything that you needed to teach within the context of writing, which I think is actually pretty cool. And I'm like a little jealous because I'm like, that would be a cool spot to be in.
Okay.
And so if you get them started in those writer's notebooks and those basics, like get them going, like anything that you need to cover, you're going to be able to do that within the context of writing, which I think is very cool.
So just switch everything to the writer's workshop because I don't have to do any of the literature. I have the time. Is that what you're saying, Larry?
I mean, I'm not saying what you should do. This is just kind of what I was thinking about. I was like, it seems to me like, you know, that you're in a position. I've
had that same thought. I've thought I don't have to do the literature with the middle school because I have someone else teaching the reading literature. But I kind of miss having the literature that I can then refer to. So I feel like I don't have the connection that I would like to have, you know, with the literature, but it does.
And there is that. I was thinking about that too, because so much of the way that we write, we learn from what we read. And so if they're not reading, you know, like in my own classroom, if we're reading like personal narratives, like that's a great time to teach them how to write a personal narrative. Or for reading persuasive pieces, it's a great time to teach that. So it's nice when it can match up. It just, you know, it doesn't.
But we could match you up, Rebecca. So you could know what the other teacher they're reading.
Right.
And then you could apply it that way. So then you wouldn't have to spend the time with the reading, but you would know what they're reading.
Yeah.
So if you want me to get you the book, let me know.
That would be helpful. Just send me a list. That would be good to know where they're at.
Okay. And then, find out where them. Yeah. I can't, who's teaching reading?
And the other thing, I know Nathan's got, is it Trana for 8th grade? Yeah. The other thing that you can do is like, even if they're not reading whole things, you know, you can read excerpts, you know, of quality literature. I know Nathan mentioned Jane Eyre the other day. I think you guys talked about in class, which was funny, like for him, because we were reading that with his sisters last summer, I guess. So he was like, he thought that was a cool connection. I'm not sure how cool he thought Jane Eyre was before, but he knew this reference, you know. And so using excerpts, and especially if it is stuff like if you poll your students and you know what they are reading, hopefully they are reading. If you know what they're reading, I think that's helpful too.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much, Lori.
No, I'm so thankful for your time, and I'm sorry. I feel like I just threw a lot of information out there and didn't have maybe as much time to.
You didn't have, you know, what other choice you had.
But there was things that I was like, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about this, you know, because without the affective domain, if we don't get that, if we're not kind of in that mode or having a vision for our students, and we start getting into, you know, the details like the 6 traits, it's like, but without that basis, we sometimes try to apply things in a way that really isn't effective. Even if they're good tools, if we're not applying them in the right context, then sometimes it's not helpful. So anyway, I do hope that it was helpful, and I would love to talk some more.
Okay, we will talk and get it
Thank
back
you.
on schedule. Thank you so
all
much,
for your
Lori.
time. Sorry for keeping you longer. I hope
No, it
everybody
was
has a
excellent.
wonderful
Thank you
Thanksgiving.
so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Rebecca,
Yes.
You know,
I'll stay.
another thing that we could do is if you want them to read something, we can also let her know. They don't have to stay in that book.
Right.
If it's something that you want to cover, you know, you guys can
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I think the idea of excerpts probably is the least time intensive, because that way we can pull things from wherever they're getting their reading from. That might be a good way to start anyway. But that brought me, you said something about the effective domain, Laura, that reminded me. So Sycamore Academy has several parents who are very concerned about kids reading fiction. Do we need to say anything about the writing? It needs to be realistic. That's what I told them when I gave them a writing assignment. I said, I don't want, you know, science fiction. I don't want things that can't actually happen, because I know that's a concern with a lot of our parents. What do we do about that? Do we say you can't write about superheroes and these types of things?
you know, it's interesting enough, Mrs. Elliser, she's pretty conservative, Catherine, but her daughters, when it comes to writing, she lets them write, and they would write about fairies and elves, and so she didn't care. So I am not about restricting all students. We want to follow their parents' restrictions. So if their parents say they don't want them to, then I would say that's where that student needs to go. But other students are going to be free to write what they want to write.
Okay.
And it's going to be difficult, especially if you're doing the peer, I can't remember what you call it, peer coaching or whatever, because then those students that aren't supposed to be reading nonfiction or fiction probably can't be put in that room. And it may take a little bit of juggling, but I feel like even for those students, I feel like it's good for students to write fiction. They can use their imagination.
Exactly.
So I'm not that conservative, but for those that are, we have to respect that. And I do respect that if you're that.
Well, if I'm not giving them assignments, yeah, if I'm not giving them books to read that are fiction, that's one thing. But if they're writing it, it's their own creativity. There's nothing wrong with your own creativity. I feel like they can write whatever, but
Right. So that's, that's
yeah,
where I'm-
okay.
But it is a little bit of a tightrope walk, because there are some that are extremely conservative and don't want their children writing fiction. And then
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and if you know that, I think that's helpful to know. Like you said, you can group students accordingly. You know, you can assign writing teams. You don't have to let them self-choose. You can assign. And sometimes I do that anyway, because I want some stronger writers. I want a mix. I don't want all of my writers who are struggling to end up in the same team, because then, their feedback is going to not be as great, and they're not going to get an opportunity to hear, the other kinds of writing that are going on. But yeah, definitely we don't want to be a stumbling block to anybody. So I think I think that is the kindest thing to do in those situations. But yeah, it puts you in an interesting spot as a teacher. Yeah, don't use Swift's modest proposal, to try to teach persuasive writing. Parents might not appreciate satire, some of them, but yeah.
I know. Yeah.
That's tough. Yeah, because
there's things even to be learned from Shakespeare. Of course, I'm a public school kid, non-Adventist kid, but Macbeth, I still have things that pop up from that were character building,
Yeah.
But again, you have to be respectful.
Yeah, and there's a and this is obviously a different kind of experience, but it's on the Hope Channel. They had this series, Jesus the Revolutionary, and I think it was like a 10-part series. And one of the episodes, it wasn't calling Jesus a superhero, but they talked about like superhero kind of focus in our culture and what superheroes have in common and all this stuff. But then they worked their way into into other more spiritual ideas, but it was just like, I think that as Christians, you know, we are in the world, even if we're not to be of it, right? And so I think in so many ways, we need to be able to speak to people where they are. And I also, you know, I like you said, I think there's a lot that we can learn from fiction, and even from learning to put our ideas, our imagination, you know, into writing as well. But yeah, you have to walk that line.
Yeah, I mean, even the Bible has some fiction in it. So
Absolutely.
You know, that's different because the Bible's blessed. I mean, I think that their mentality is that the Bible is blessed fiction and anything else. But there's still plenty of good stuff out there that is nonfiction.
Yeah, and I guess that does make it like the excerpts and stuff that you would have to choose would make it, that can definitely make it more challenging.
I have used excerpts from fiction as good. I would just say this is a good writing example, and we're not reading the whole book, but it is fiction. And I haven't ever gotten any flack for that.
That's good.
Thank you, guys. I gotta go. My kids are starting to tear the house apart.
Yeah,
So
I'm
thanks
sorry. I
again.
know I need to.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Annette. Lori, that was wonderful. So appreciate
That's
it.
very
Thank you
helpful.
so much.
All
Well,
right.
I appreciate it.
Right. Now, are you currently, I know you're working at home, but are you currently working outside of home?
Me?
Mhm.
I am not working outside of the home at all. My mom requires kind of 24/7 supervision. So I am teaching 3 classes for VCU. I didn't intend to teach 3 classes because that's actually more of a load than I wanted, but that's how it turned out. They last minute needed somebody to teach this teaching writing class that I used to teach all the time. And I had kind of let it go because it's intensive, but they had somebody quit at the last minute, which is really unusual. But so,
And is
yeah.
that live or online?
So it is, the teaching writing class is a synchronous class. So we do meet once a week via Zoom. And then I have another class that I'm teaching that's teaching, well, it's literacy in the content areas. So it's for, you know, my social studies, and I've got psych majors. I've got all kinds of people in there who are interested, who have like education minors and things. And so it's literacy, building literacy into learning and in the content areas. And that one's completely asynchronous. And then I have a seminar class that I'm working with our interns, our student teachers who are in the master's program, but I only have to meet with them 6 times over the course of the semester. So.
Okay. All right. Well, honestly, thank you so much, because I think it's the direction that we need to go, and you're helping us get there. And I will talk to everybody, and then we'll be in touch again about a possible other time when we can meet.
Yeah, if anybody wants to deep dive into like 6 traits, you know, and definitely I think if you got Spandell's book, I think you can do it like on your own, and all those activities are in there, and you'll get it. Like there's nothing you're not going to get like from there. But if other people didn't want to get the book, but kind of wanted like a session on 6 traits, like I'm happy to do that, or anything else. Genre studies, like teaching with an inquiry model, is pretty, you know, pretty straightforward, easy to do. I gave a brief overview of it, but that kind of thing, I'm happy to do that if anybody's interested.
And I'm very, very interested. Thank you, Lori. It was
Right,
great. And I actually bought the book and I haven't even looked at it yet. So I'll get into the book, and then anyways, we'll be back in touch with you after the break.
That sounds good. And Mrs. Reese, I know that Nathan and I still have some things we need to get to you. We do stuff, and then I'm bad. Sometimes I'm following up. Just
It's all right, Lori. I know that he's working on it, so it's no problem. I get it. It's all good.
we need to do better. And he'll remind me, and I'm like, I know, but I have to take care of Gran right now. Hold on, and then we'll do it. And then whatever
Okay.
else comes up. So
No worries. No worries.
but I appreciate you. And Annette, it was really nice to meet you.
What'd you say, Lori?
Annette, it was so nice to meet you and hear your background and your thoughts. And it was great. It was very helpful.
Thank you, Lori. It was nice meeting you as well. And I'm going to be in touch with you on something.
That sounds good. That
Yeah,
sounds
it's an
great.
Email from me.
I will be looking for it. Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and thank you again for this opportunity.
You too, Lori. Thank you. Thank you for doing this work.
Bye.
Bye.